Good morning. My name is Kevin Bruno. I'm with Southwest Training Consultants. I'm retired state police. I did state police for 20 years. When I retired, one of the things that I got involved in was training. And prior to retirement, I did quite a bit of training. With that, I started this company with a buddy of mine. And one of the things that we do is the crash report refresher. What we're going to be talking about today is a new crash report that's coming out. You guys are going to see, I would imagine, in the next maybe few months, something probably tangible in your systems. You guys all work off of the track system, so within the track system, you guys should see something relatively quick. Now, DPS actually already has it. They've got it in their test environment. Sean's going to be writing up crash reports all weekend long so that he can report back to, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So with that being said, you guys should be seeing it probably, I would imagine it's probably going to be another 30 days or so. But you guys will start seeing the new tracks, or the new crash report in tracks relatively quick. They did this to try and ensure that we could get it into tracks first before the actual paper version of it was brought out. Now with the paper version, one of the things they did that I thought was really kind of cool is they put it in PDF. It's a fillable PDF, so instead of Excel and being able to change some of the boxes and really kind of lousing things up, you go in and all the boxes are there. It's got drop downs for everything that you need. It's actually a really conducive to being able to fill it out. And so if tracks ever went down or something happened, you've got an additional way of taking care of the report, so it's not too big of a deal. The class is scheduled for 4 hours. There we go. Class is scheduled for 4 hours. There's going to be breaks on the hour, lots of discussion. I really want you guys to ask questions. There's a lot of things that we were taught back in the day that they're not valid any longer. And so if you guys have questions, concerns, let me know. The pre-test and post-test I'm going to pass on. I'm going to have you guys review a crash report in lieu of. So we'll talk about that. And then cell phones, if you guys have them, just put them on mute. If you need to get up and take the call, I don't. It doesn't bother me. It's not a problem at all. Restrooms, I explained, they're right around the corner. And then I just want you guys to get something out of the class. So first things first. Why do we do crash reports? Don't answer. Why do we do crash reports? Thank you very much. Insurance purposes. We do them for insurance purposes. That's what it's almost always identified. I've been teaching this class now for almost 2.5 years, and previous to the new report coming out, we would just go over some of the nuances that needed to be addressed. And so one of the things that we would identify with is, why do we do crash reports? And in a lot of cases, no one ever actually told you, why you do them. I mean, you just make the assumption because that's generally where they go, right? And I don't know that a whole lot of officers or anyone even related to law enforcement has really any idea where these things actually go. Do you have any idea how many people actually see your report? If you had to guess?
There's a lot, yes.
How many?
I'd say dozens. You have insurance, you have hospital attorneys, you have DOT for...
It is absolutely overwhelming, and a lot of people don't think about this. And so I want you to kind of put this in the context of what you do and how you do it. The last crash report that you filled out, now you may not do them all the time, it may not be a normal scope of your duty, but the last crash report that you filled out, are you okay with it? Thinking back, could you have done better? Could you have put a little more information in it? I hate to say this.
Never told me if I needed more information.
Yeah. I was a sergeant, that's why he did that. The fact, he did a good job, don't listen to that. The fact of the matter is that these crash reports go somewhere. They go somewhere. They actually go a lot of places. I'm going to talk about that, but what I want to do is I want to show you guys some of the numbers. Look, in 2013, there was 39,604 crashes. We had 100,000 people involved in these crashes. 16,000 people were injured, and we lost 311 people. So moving up to 2015, the number of crashes actually goes up a little. And I'm going to kick back. So 6,000 crashes, we go up. Another 5,000 people were involved. We've got 19,000 people injured, but oddly enough, the number of people actually killed actually went down a little bit. Now this is what's really interesting. We have no idea what's going to happen from one month to the next. We just don't know. You can't predict it. But the crashes actually from 2015 to 2016 went up. I'm sorry, they went down. The number of crashes went down. It's only 200, but the number of people involved actually went down. The number of people injured, oddly enough, went up, and the number of people killed went up significantly. So we gained almost 107 people died in these crashes during this time period. Now, there's some things that have going on in the state of New Mexico. I don't know how much you guys know about southeast New Mexico, but the oil field is booming like it's never done before. They're saying that they found a pocket of oil down there that's the size of almost the state of Texas. It's unbelievable. They said it's going to take years and years and years to draw this oil up. Well, with that being said, the population down there has just exploded. They said that the population in Carlsbad right now, the actual population prior to the oil field, getting where it is, was around 25,000 people. They're saying though they're sitting around 75,000. And you got to imagine all these people just kind of flooding this place. What kind of result, what's going to happen from this? If you look at the fatals for just this year alone, the number in Lee County and that whole region and Eddy County has just skyrocketed. They've had 3 over the last 2 months where they've had, in 2 crashes, 4 people have died. It's been oil-filled trucks versus semi, and they're crossing the lane marker. They're crossing the lane lines and going head-on into a semi. So the number's significant, but the fact is that we have the ability of affecting that. We have the ability of changing that. Listen, I know that I am no longer in law enforcement. I retired and I moved on, but you guys, everything that you do makes a difference in people's lives, and a lot of times we don't think about it that way. So I'm going to ask you guys a question. When you see a cop, what's the first thing that you do?
Sit up straight. Slow down.
You do. No. Seriously, think about this for a second. We don't do it like because we think you're going to get in trouble or anything. You do it because subconsciously there's a consequence for these things. Everyone understands that. We were brought up to understand there's a consequence for our actions. We know what the consequence is. You can get a ticket, you could get stopped, you can get in trouble from work if you got a ticket off duty or even on duty. Could you imagine? I couldn't imagine on duty, but you get what I'm saying. People pay attention to what you guys do. They pay attention to everything that you guys do. So when you're driving around, pay attention to what people are doing. Not their actual driving habit or their action or whatever, but pay attention. You've seen people put their seatbelt on, right? You've seen people drop their phone. Isn't that the greatest thing ever?
So
They're sitting there talking, all of a sudden their phone's just gone. What? What are you doing? But people do. They pay attention to what you guys do. This is one of the things that I've been trying to encourage. Do you guys have any idea in your area where the most crashes occur?
Yeah.
Where is it for you?
5 and the 246 and then 550.
Okay, anywhere on 550? Oh, yeah. Okay. Is there a mile marker? Okay,
The 240, usually at the 246, 247, and then at the 261.
Yeah.
okay. For you guys, where is it?
Well, we only have one main road. So.
Well, I know, but there's several points in that. I know.
Like for fatals, it's going to be between the interstate of 202 and the 203.
Okay.
201 with that 2 mile.
Right in that section of where the ramp is, right?
A lot of fatals. I don't know why it's a straight drive.
Right.
And then main intersection is probably be right off the freeway of Emilio Lopez and Main Street.
Okay.
Because that's right off the freeway and a lot of traffic, gas stations and stuff.
You've been around the state a little bit. If you had to identify an area where you've previously worked, where would you say is like a high area of crashes?
I would say Lamahana.
Okay. So,
And that just causes chain reactions.
yeah, because everyone decides they have to wreck because they have to watch it, right?
It's just worse.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you put a little weather on the road and you're
Yeah.
done.
For me, too, sir, it would be State Road 18 between Lovington and Hobbs, and then 128 between Jow all the way down towards Lovington.
And that's where the majority of fatals are happening. You know what's funny is Lee County actually superseded Albuquerque in fatals last month and the month before. Yeah, they've had more fatals down there than Albuquerque has, which is not a normal thing. I mean, you're talking about a population difference of like hundreds of thousands of people, and yet they're having more fatals down there than they are up here. It's significant. But the fact is, we have the ability of affecting change. Now, the reason why I'm telling you this is, You guys know where the problem areas are. The next opportunity you have that you have to get caught up on reports, or you have to get on, the computer, maybe get something caught up, and you don't want to do that in the office, go sit there. Yeah, go sit there. You'd be amazed at the difference. Yeah, they pay attention. They actually start being aware of what's going on. So, look, your goal is public safety. This is what your job, your responsibility is. And into your community, it's the simplest little things that you guys do. And this kind of folds into, what we're going to be talking about. Look, I'm going to ask you guys to take these crash reports, and I'm going to ask you to put as much effort into them as you possibly can. And one of the questions I have for you is, how long does it take you to do a crash report? On tracks, it's pretty easy, right? Is that fair? Do you do them?
We just got the system, so we
Did you?
have to do them.
Okay.
I've been writing them up.
You're gonna really enjoy this because it's unbelievable compared to what you used to do. You're gonna find really, really quick that it's really nice. Is that fair? Yeah, it's incredible. I wish they would have had that stuff when I was chiseling
The length of the crash, the length of time in the crash report is what you put into it.
And I agree, and I think the reason why I asked that question is I'm trying to get a general parameter on what it takes for you to do a report. How long does it take you generally to do a report?
I think it just depends on how many vehicles are involved, how many people.
Probably a couple hours.
Okay. To do a good, thorough job, yes, a couple hours. I get the gamut. I get people telling me it takes 30 minutes to 45 minutes to an hour and a half. And for some of them, I can see that. You get a minor 44, whatever the case may be, you're not doing a diagram, and so you kick something out relatively quick, it's not a big deal. How big of a deal would it take to add an additional 10 minutes to this crash report, to this report? And so the reason why I'm asking you that, the reason why I'm saying this is because I think there's a ton of value in what we do and the product that we provide to the community. I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to refrain from using agencies, but my daughter was involved in a crash a few years ago. It was probably about 3 or 4 years ago. She was in a vehicle that she shouldn't have been in. She accepted a ride from somebody that had been drinking the night before. This young man was, I think, a couple years older than her, offered to give her and a bunch of friends a ride home. He was unable to negotiate a curve. As he did this, he smacks into a barrier, spins around like a top. When he did this, one of the kids ended up in a coma for a week. My daughter ended up with some pretty bad injury to her head. She met the windshield. Her and her friend were sitting in the front seat unbuckled because they couldn't get the buckle over them. So why would you wear it? Good grief. Anyway, my daughter sustained some pretty heavy injuries. We were in the hospital for the better part of the day and into the evening, and it was a significant 45. It was a significant crash, injuries, and again, the kid in the back seat actually was in a coma for almost a week. The officer that wrote the report, no joke, wrote 2 paragraphs totaling 6 sentences. There was 3 sentences in the first paragraph and 3 sentences in the second. Now, mind you, he wrote a criminal complaint. He wrote probable cause. He did all those things, but those things don't get identified for the crash report. They don't go to the state. They don't go to where they need to go to be able to collect the information as to what happened, why it happened, how it happened, that kind of thing. It was the most embarrassing thing I think I've ever seen. Again, not identifying any specific agency, but these things happen. And the problem with it is that some citizen, my daughter, and all the other kids in this car deserved, well, except for the driver, deserved someone affording them that, extra 10 minutes, that extra 30 minutes, whatever it may be. And I know that in some cases, calls get stacked. I know that things happen. I know that there are requirements and time limits and things like that. But all I'm saying is if we can just find a way and encourage those around us to take an extra 10 minutes to fill out this report, it would make the world of difference to not only people like my daughter, but people that have to see this report beyond this. So again, we're talking about numbers that are pretty significant. So again, the numbers are from 2016. The numbers are in the system from 2017, and this is what I want you to do. I want you to write this down. Some of you have already been there, but the address is www.unm.edu. If you will go to the search on that web page and type in GPS, unm.edu, and if you'll type in GPS in the search, it's going to pull up several different parameters. What you're looking for is the traffic safety unit, traffic safety research unit. And what they do is they collect every single report that comes into the state of New Mexico. Every single report that's documented in New Mexico goes to them, either through DOT or through a system like Trax, but they get every single one. Now, the reason why this is so significant is I can tell you what these numbers are. I can actually tell you how many pedestrians were hit in 2017. I can tell you how many pedestrians were hit in Albuquerque in 2017. I can tell you how many pedestrians, how many bicyclists, I can tell you anything you want to know. I can tell you the time of day crashes are more prevalent. I can tell you anything it is that you want to know. I can find the information because it's all categorized. It's all in the system. The other thing that's really cool about this is they use these things. There's purpose for what they do, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. So I'm going to ask, or I'm going to go through this. Again, some of what we're doing out there and some of the things that you guys are doing affects change. Now, who's been on the longest? Who thinks, Sean, how long have you been on?
18 in December.
Good grief, really? You're getting old. Anyone more than 18? Come on. I know, I'm teasing. The fact is the numbers go back to 1979. Now, there's a lot of things that actually change, but if you look at this chart, you're looking at what the fatalities were. Now, the fatalities have stayed somewhat almost consistent, right? They've gone down. They've gone down from up here, and again, we're looking at these numbers over here. So from the 600 down to just under 400 in most of these cases. Now, we've seen some numbers dip. You can see that 15 and that what appears to be like the 13 have dipped. But the fact is that the numbers have kind of stayed consistent. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about this is if you look at the serious injury, look how significant they've dropped. And we're talking about thousands, not just the hundreds. The fact is every crash report that you guys do gets submitted somewhere, it goes somewhere. Well, NHTSA gets these things, and when NHTSA gets these things, they have the ability of identifying. Well, when NHTSA gets them, they also are provided in a lot of cases to vehicle manufacturers. Have any of you worked a total airbag deployment crash yet? Where every single airbag's gone off in the car? Yeah? Isn't that the coolest thing in the whole wide world? It's like a tent. There's side and there's, do you guys remember building the forts over the couch with the blankets? Yeah, you gotta climb into the car to get into everybody to see if they're okay. And in most cases, they're okay. They're just kind of knocked around. Yeah, you gotta kind of fold yourself in there to see but they've got them now in the dash on below. They've got them in the front. They've got them on the sides. They've got them in the rear. Those things pop up all over the place. The fact is they're making cars a lot safer than they ever were before. And I don't know if any of you have ever seen the video of Room to Live. They actually have made a video talking about how cars are manufactured to sustain rollovers and heavy impact and all those things, because they make that cargo area a place where there's room to live. So with that being said, there's a lot of reason why these numbers are the way that they are. Now, the state has done this this last year. Every year they do this, but they're projecting what the future holds for New Mexico. Now, based on what these last 5 numbers indicate, they're looking at an increase of up to 48,000, almost 49,000 this year, or I'm sorry, yeah, for this year, and then up to 2020, it's gonna be 50,000 crashes. Now, with that being said, we have the ability of changing this. Look, we can't stop every crash. We really can't. You know that, I know that, and that's okay, but if we can incite the idea within law enforcement that, you know, if they present themselves in different places, in different locations, we can really affect change. Now, did you guys hear about Takata airbags? Do you know what happened? What was going on with them?
Basically, they were, I mean, long story short, they were deflating, they were inflating by themselves.
There was a couple of things that actually happened, right? So one of the things was the inflation issue was of great concern, but the bigger issue was there were some pieces interior that were actually coming out and displaying themselves as shrapnel coming through the bag and actually cutting people. So there were several problems there were several defects. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of the biggest recalls that's ever been done because Takata made airbags for like dozens of manufacturers. If you didn't get a recall, I'm actually surprised. Does anyone drive a Jeep? 2000, okay. probably 12 to 15, I think is generally when most of those things are coming. But every class, I usually have someone that drives a Jeep, and
17, I didn't.
no, okay, yeah, they had already replaced them by then. But when Takata came out, or when this came out, again, what they found was these crash reports are coming in, and people are sustaining injury in crashes they shouldn't sustain injury. You know, a minor fender bender to the rear, the airbag deploys, and all of a sudden they've got like cuts all over their face. And why would that even happen? Again, some of that shrapnel was coming out. Did you guys hear about Firestone? This is a little older. This is probably like early 2000, late 90s. You remember this?
Yeah, because they were almost exclusively to Ford Explorers.
Almost exclusively, you're right. What happened was Firestone made a specific tire where the tread would actually separate from the tire. It's a crazy thought to even think. You guys have heard of retreads, I hope. If not, the practice is they basically make the tire, they make the shell of the tire, it's this almost like an inner tube kind of thing, and then they adhere the tread to it. Well, what was happening with these is the tread would come off, and then the tire couldn't withstand the weight of the vehicle, and the tire would pop, and then before you know it, the car's fishtailing. Well, in the Ford Explorer, which isn't greatly known for its balance, especially back in the day. Now it's a little bit better because it's a little more stable because it's a little wider, but it was a narrow, taller vehicle, and those things were rolling over left and right. We had one here. I worked one on 9 Mile Hill in Albuquerque several years back. Well, it was early 2000s, and what had occurred was there was 2 females, sisters. They were going to Phoenix to see family, and the driver had her 12-year-old in the back. The 12-year-old was laying down. It was early in the morning. She wasn't buckled. They were going up the road, and sure enough, the tread just came right off. Like it just rolled off because it was just laying in the road, like just laying there. Well, as soon as it came off, you could see the striations from the tire and the marks that it was leaving because the tread that was on the sides of the tire of the tube were still hitting. So it's leaving this weird mark. Well, she started to fishtail, and you can absolutely see the marks from where she's going because she was doing 75, 80. The vehicle, the tire pops, she loses control, she rolls it. It rolls 1 1/4 times. It landed on its side, and her daughter got ejected and landed on her head and passed. It was horrible. I felt like horribly bad about it, but when looking at it, this was all going on, and I was made aware of this. We were all made aware of it at the time, so it was something we had to really pay attention to. Sure enough, I took a ton of pictures of the road, the tire, and made sure that it was really well documented because I knew what was going to happen. I knew that at some point I'm going to get deposed, something's going to come of this, so I need to be aware and pay attention. So these things happen. The fact of the matter is NHTSA got this information from crash reports that you guys have done. I know Firestone's probably a little older, and that's okay, but the fact is when you guys do these crash reports, they go somewhere, they have value, and a lot of times we don't think about it that way. We don't realize how significant it is. So with that being said, where do you think it goes? And so we talk about all the different locations that this darn thing takes, where it ends up. First things first, your supervisor's going to see it, right? In tracks, what's going to happen is they're going to sign off on it. They check a box, they say okay, and off it goes. As soon as it leaves, what happens in tracks is the system automatically generates the report at DOT, and it automatically sends it to UNM. Now, the reason why UNM is such a big deal is they keep all the statistical data. When you guys get a chance, go to that website. It's really cool. You can see anything. I mean, it's amazing. You want to know where the drunk arrests are? You want to know where the drunk crashes are? You want to know anything about any traffic type event? It's all in there, so just go. What's really cool about this, though, when they do these things in tracks, is the report actually gets generated, and as it gets generated in there, all the errors, all the human error that we generally cause gets washed away because in tracks, it doesn't allow you that ability. So you guys are way ahead of the game. The fact that you guys are all up on and getting ready to really kind of negates a lot of the issue that generally come with regular crash reports. Now, the reason why I say that is back in the day, if you would have turned in a crash report that was missing something like a box was empty, what would we have done? What would I have done?
I don't know, well, it depends. I mean, you could just put NA, or you could just write.
Okay, so let's just say you didn't put anything. What would I have done?
You might have just read the report and said, oh, I think this might be the best answer for that box.
Did you ever get red ink on yours?
Kickback.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of what we were taught, and that's the way that it was done, right? If you didn't do something correct, you got some red ink on it or whatever. In a lot of cases, we were asking for you to fill out every box. So if you fill out every box, that meant you put none or NA or same as above or some of those things to fill in to make sure that I knew that you asked for the information. The other thing that we had to have a tendency to do is we'd line out a box. So if you're not using this particular box, you would put a line through it, right? Do you remember that? Yeah. We can't do that anymore because what's happening with these crash reports is they're going into a computer and they're getting scanned. And what's happening is everything that's identified within that scan is identifying as what's actually happening. So the problem is guys are putting NA in some of these boxes and it recognizes NA as someone's name. So none, NA, unknown's actually acceptable because they understand that in some cases you are going to have an unknown driver. Hit and runs, things like that, you might not know who the driver was, or if multiple people were ejected from a vehicle and you can't identify the driver readily available, easily. But what's really interesting about this is none has been a passenger in like 15,000 cars last year, and oddly enough, in crashes all over New Mexico. And God, the guy's nuts. He's just everywhere. And so the problem is that when we put that in there, that's how it's categorized. The same thing with NA. NA's been in crashes everywhere. Yeah, right? So the problem with it is that we have to kind of reel back and understand that because we live in a digital age, things are completely different now. And the reason why this is so significant is that when you are putting these things together, you have to know. Now, Trax doesn't allow you some of these parameters any longer. If you don't identify that there's passengers in the vehicle, you just don't get the box. If you identify this as a one vehicle crash, you don't get vehicle number 2. And this is a big deal because there are agencies out there right now, and no offense to anybody, but there are agencies out there right now that if they have a one vehicle crash and they fill out the report, they'll generally put unknown as driver number 2. They'll leave everything else blank, but as far as the driver's name, they'll put unknown, leading someone to believe that there was another vehicle, right? I mean, that's what you would take from that. Yeah, well, somehow someone told them that you have to put something in there, so they put unknown. Well, no, there was just a one vehicle crash. There was nobody else out there. The guy hit a deer. There was no other vehicle involved. There's no reason to put unknown. But there are some agencies out there that are still putting that in there. So now it creates a problem. Now the system, and in Trax you couldn't do that, because in Trax, it would give you the parameters for all the vehicle information, and you'd basically get declined. It'd give you a default that says you can't do that. But for the other reports, the problem is that guys are still doing this, and it's one of those things we need to kind of fix. Anyway, the media gets a hold of these reports. Doesn't happen very often, but every now and then we have a significant crash that's going to require the media to get a hold of it. Have you guys seen, like on Channel 7, they'll show a clip of like a probable cause statement, or yeah, I'll tell you what, you get your crash report on there, you better make sure it's good, because I'd hate to think, because we're horribly critical of each other, right? You guys watch Cops or Live PD? The whole time you sit there and critique them, don't you? What's that guy doing? Like, what is he doing?
Get dismissed in court.
Yeah. I'm guessing some of it may be staged, who knows, whatever. Anyway, lawyers are going to get a hold of these reports, judges are going to get a hold of these reports, families of the involved, which is generally kind of what we're looking at and why we often think of the insurance companies. And I put the insurance companies a little lower on here because the fact of the matter is I don't want that to be the focal point of why you do what you do. Listen, in a crash report, you have the ability of identifying fault. It's almost expected. At some point, you're going to have to identify what the parameters of were in this crash. And you have the ability of putting your opinion. Thank you. Yes, opinion. You have the ability of putting your opinion in there. What do you base your opinion on? Your investigation. Facts. What you know, your training and everything that you've been taught for years and years. You don't just randomly say, well, I think if you know, and I had an officer, I'm going to tell the story real quick because I think it's fun. I had an officer in Las Cruces that I told that I was a brand new sergeant. I told him, I need you to put more information in your reports. You're just not putting enough in there. And he's a very articulate man, very good at what he did, but he just, for whatever reason, I had to get on him about this. So he ends up working a crash in Chaparral, New Mexico. And what had happened was a young man was crossing the street. A car didn't see him because the sun was somewhat blinding him. And so he clipped the guy. The guy didn't get hurt. He fell to the ground. They called paramedics. The officer gets there, takes the report. The report comes in, and the narrative, the first sentence in the narrative, as the morning sun glistened off the dew in the adjacent field, oh yeah, I was like, golly, you've got to be kidding me. This isn't, now he's messing with me, but I told him I wanted more detail. Well, this is the detail he put in there. No, it gets way better. The last sentence in the report, he puts in there, if the pedestrian would have just stayed home, this crash would have never occurred. You gotta be kidding me. That's not even a thing. You can't put that. I should have saved the report. There's a lot of things in my career I should have saved. I should have saved the report because we left. Yeah. Golly, I couldn't believe he did it. And it was funny because it's true, right? If people would just stay home, half these things wouldn't happen. We wouldn't have half the problems we do. Insurance companies have an expectation that you're going to put forth an honest effort and you're going to put forth the information that you can. And I'm going to tell you guys, if you have the ability of snapping a couple pictures, by all means do. In Trax, you can upload them. It's super simple. There's nothing to it. Trax gives you guys a lot of really cool features. You guys can do diagramming in there really easy. Yeah, you can do photographs. There's a lot of things that you can do. So I'll hit on some of those things in a little bit because Sean's got a ton of information when it comes to that because he knows the system really, really well. But the fact is we have the ability of putting these things in there. So again, insurance companies, it's important to them, but it's not the end all be all. There's actually other reasons why we do it. National databases get these things. FARS, which is the fatality analysis, NHTSA gets these things, and again, we look at what NHTSA's role is, and they're trying to look at safety and overall. So they share these reports with car manufacturers, they share the data with car manufacturers. You guys would be amazed. Some of your reports have been seen by people at the NHTSA, they've been seen at people at Ford, they've been seen by people all over the place. And you think, well, it's not that big of a deal. Well, it is. It's huge. And we don't give it enough credit because it's usually not in your top 5 of the things that you want to do today. I mean, I hate to say that, but it is what it is. And then recently, and this is really kind of interesting, Carfax and Experian have started buying these reports. They've also done something that's really unique. You all have some kind of records management system. You all have some way of data entry, but you also have some way of entering in the reports. Now, for you guys, it's all Trax, but prior to Trax, you probably had some software or something. Is that fair? I don't know that you did. Did you guys have any system? Well, so there is a company that puts together the traffic crash report, the uniform crash report for New Mexico, and they'll basically offer their service to agencies throughout. They'll tell Roswell PD, we've got this, this particular crash report in this software, and I'll tell you what, we're going to sell it to you for $5,000, but we want access to all the reports. So sure enough, for $5,000, it's cheap. Let's do it. Why not? So they get the crash report. They have the ability of doing all their data entry. They've got all the stuff. It merges over with their records management stuff. Everything's great. It's terrific, right? Well, the value is that now Carfax and Experian and some of these others actually get the report. Now you would think, I don't know that that's fair. Like, why should they get the report? Whatever. Have any of you bought a car recently? A used one by chance? No one? No used cars. Not one of you. No. If you were to go buy a used car, would you want to know if it was involved in a crash? You've heard of Carfax. You know what Carfax is, right? If in most cases, dealerships are offering you this report, and that report generally identifies all the things that have happened with this car. If the car's been totaled, if the car's been in a crash, where the crash damage was. You don't want to buy a car that was in Houston a couple years ago, right? You just don't. I don't want a flooded out hoopty that's got this weird line all the way through the interior of the car. That line is mud, and they just couldn't get it off. The fact is, though, is they have these reports now, so they're getting the crash reports on a regular basis. Now, not all of them, but they're trying to do as best they can because, again, the value to them is the value that they could pass on to you when you go to look and buy a car. We don't think about it that way because we almost think it's like kind of protected, but it's not. These things are public record. They go to a lot of different places. So when I asked you guys earlier how many people actually see your report, how many do you think it is? And in a lot of cases, I was always under the impression, well, the sergeant and maybe the admin and maybe a couple people, right? It's seen by hundreds of people in most cases. Not all, but in most cases. Because in any insurance claim, you guys know this, they have like 5 different adjusters that are going to review the claim. They're going to have all sorts of people looking at the report. They'll have experts looking at it, especially if it's a bigger crash, right? So the significance of the report, if you had to identify, and I'm going to tell you it's in Albuquerque, a intersection or location where more crashes occur than anywhere else in the state of New Mexico, where would you say it was?
San Mateo, Montgomery.
Thank you very much. That's perfect. The fact of the matter is San Mateo and Montgomery was actually at the top. San Mateo and Montgomery was at the top of the list for years and years and years. Several years ago, they did something very unique. They recognized that something had to change. Do you guys know where it is?
Yes.
You guys know, everyone knows where it is? Kind of, sort of, maybe, Del Norte High School, right? Okay. Sits right in the center of Albuquerque. It's kind of a central location, a lot of traffic, right? They changed the lighting pattern. It's the dumbest thing in the world. A lot of people don't think that it's that significant, but the fact is they changed the pattern. When you guys get to an intersection, you generally assume that if you're in a left turn lane, that the turn arrow is going to give you the green arrow first, and that opposing green arrows will go, and you'll both go from one direction to the other. So if you're northbound on San Mateo, and you come up to Montgomery, there are multiple lanes available to you. There's actually 6. There's 3 that go north. There's 2 that will turn to the west, and 1 that'll turn to the east. When you get into those lanes, the first thing that happens is the light turns green for all of it. So the green arrow goes, and all the traffic goes northbound. Well, they allow that green arrow to go for a minute or 2. It drains those lanes, and then all of a sudden the light turns red. Traffic stays green, no big deal, and then all of a sudden the other traffic gets to go. So now we have opposing traffic going, no big deal. They stop this traffic northbound, and they allow that arrow for the southbound to the east to go. They did the same thing for east and west on Montgomery. You would not believe how significant the change was. People actually have to pay attention now because they just assumed that the light was going to turn green at some point. If you guys pay attention to the traffic lights when you go through town, anywhere you go through town, Rio Rancho does it too. Pay attention to the way that the traffic pattern is because it's not the same at every intersection. If you're coming up the hill on 528, coming into Rio Rancho, and you pass the Ford dealership, you get to that intersection, there's the car wash on the corner and then Intel's on the other side. That traffic, that green arrow light, doesn't actually turn green until the very end of the cycle. So you get to go northbound for however long, and you're sitting there at the turn lane like, what's going on? And then it turns green.
And now you're
And
seeing more the yellow blinking.
The yellow
That's
blinking?
confusing people too, because they're like, can I go or can
Yeah, they almost want to go, yeah. Maybe I should be aware. The fact is, changing some of the little things that are done changes things. Have you guys seen roundabouts? Albuquerque's starting to pop up with them left and right. Santa Fe's starting to pop up with them left and right. A lot of people are like completely baffled by this because how does a roundabout actually affect change? But people have to pay attention. You have to watch what you're doing. The benefit to the roundabout is that you don't have to worry about the traffic to your right. You only have to worry about the traffic to your left. So what they've negated is that whole cross, do I have to wait? Who gets to go first? How do I let them go? Who was here first? And in Albuquerque, that doesn't even matter. You just go because how dare you wait for somebody else? I mean, why would you do that? You know what I'm saying? It's driving in Albuquerque just makes me a little bit crazy. The fact of the matter is the significance of the report is huge, and it does affect change. And you guys have actually affected change whether you believe it or not. Look at some of the little things. 550 is a really good example of this. 550 for years and years and years was a 2-lane road. 1 lane north and 1 lane south. That's not okay. The fatals that happen on that road now are enough, but back in the day it was even more than that because there was just nowhere for anyone to go. You look at a lot of different things that are happening. Look at the cable barriers. Law enforcement as a whole got kind of frustrated with it because now you can't cross the median, chase people down, right? But the fact is it's saved unbelievable lives. I mean, if you think about how many times cars have come across and hit that barrier instead of going into oncoming traffic, it's unbelievable.
They even put up, for the wildland
Yeah.
detectors.
Yes.
Now, they just put it
On
on the
550.
550. So if
That
it's
is-
here, then the light will come on and tell
Like
you.
if it detects wild animals?
Yeah.
it'll start blinking.
Well, did you see the whole fencing that they did just south of Cuba?
How many crashes and stops?
Yeah, the fencing over there is incredible. They put fencing
Oh, yeah.
all the way
That's
up
because we have
for.
so many out versus vehicles
Yeah.
and cows and.
Well, so you guys, seriously, every time you guys do one of those reports, somebody's paying attention to it. And that's the reason why I'm telling you, is because you can see it in the things that are happening. You can see it in what's happening around us and what's going on and how things are going. We affect change. We do. It just may not be something that you see every single day. You know, like, when's this going to happen, or why is this happening, or whatever. And I mean, we can look at a lot of different stuff. You know, the growth of the west side has really changed the dynamic of how traffic, you know, comes from one side to the other. But look at the interchange at 25 and Paseo. There was a crash, if not multiple crashes, every single day at Jefferson and Paseo. There was not a day that went by that there was not a crash, if not multiple, at that intersection. And now there's like none. It's dwindled to nothing. And that's another one of those intersections where change has actually occurred. So the significance of the report is huge. And it even goes into, and what I was saying earlier was the idea behind car manufacturers and how they do things. It's really unbelievable to think what cars are made of, how they're made, why, you know, the design that they are. Do you guys remember your first car? Anyone drive anything really cool? Like a Gremlin or something? No? Thinking back to what your car was with the first car that you got, in a lot of cases, you know, there was more steel to it. I mean, it had girth, it had, you know, it could hold on, but it also had a lot of safety issues that were not okay. I mean, there were cars back in the day where seatbelts, who needs that? Why do we need those? My point to this is that, again, every report that you guys do, every report that you guys put together, there is some significance. There is something that goes along with it. Now, the information is used in a lot of different ways. Again, there's a ton of different things, from identifying where animals are crossing to identifying an intersection that's got a problem. And I'm telling you, those roundabouts are incredible. They make a huge difference because, again, it's a dynamic that has changed the way that people approach and look at an intersection. So they have to be paying attention. State-run projects. Do any of you guys do DWI, checkpoints, SAP patrols, anything like that? Do you guys do STEP? Buckle up?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Those things are all funded based on how the state needs money. We are going to see an influx because of the number of commercial motor vehicle crashes that are happening in Lee County. The state police has sent officers on almost a regular basis now. They were down there just 2 weeks ago doing another operation trying to enforce some of those things because it's overwhelming. It's unbelievable. But the state actually gets funding based on what goes on in the state. So this is, I think, a really good example of how this kind of flows. But several years ago, when Governor Richardson was here, the state saw the numbers in DWI really, really super high. We were number 1, 2, or 3 in the state or in the United States for DWI fatalities. Governor Richardson, where the money came from, most of it was probably from NHTSA, but had money made available, used money from internally within the state, and threw a ton of money at the problem. We were working overtime as fast as we possibly could. We had checkpoints probably at least 2 or 3 a month, if not more. We were doing all sorts of stuff. STEP, buckle up, you name it, we were doing it. DWI in New Mexico has changed dramatically over the years. In 2015, I think, 14, 15, we actually ended up being number 26 in the nation. From number 1, 2, or 3, we went to 26. Now the numbers have dwindled a little and we've gotten back to where we don't want to be, but there's a lot of things that are factored into that. One, the population boom down south has really changed the dynamic. There are some more people down there that choose to drink and drive, and it's unfortunate, but the loss of law enforcement in some areas too. I mean, every agency's down. It's unfortunate, but keeping a full staff of law enforcement in most agencies is very, very difficult. With that being said, we've seen the number get down to about 10. If I'm not mistaken, the last check was New Mexico is at 10 in the United States, which isn't horrible. It's not great, but we've been into worse locations. Is what I'm getting at. You guys have the ability of affecting that, so that's what that is. And then overtime. I put the smiley faces because I liked overtime. There was no time like overtime. I worked it as often as I possibly could. I loved it. It was great. And so, getting out there and going and doing those things. All right, so one of the questions I have is, how would you investigate the crash if your mom was involved? Would you do it differently? How would you investigate the crash if it was one of you guys? If you had to work a crash that State Police was involved in, or Los Lunas PD was involved in, or Valencia County, would you do the crash differently? Yeah, say no. No.
Well, yeah,
Look.
You say no, but I mean, subconsciously, we've all worked.
Is that a yes?
We've all worked crashes, the fender benders, we've treated those differently than we've done the fatals. I mean, we can all agree to that. It's a fatal crash.
You do work it differently. The fact is, though, every person deserves your utmost professionalism when it comes to these reports. If you had to identify on a scale of 1 to 10 where you put the crash report on your day-to-day activity, where would you put it? If you had to identify on a 1 to 10 scale, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest, where would you put crash report? All the things you do in a day, how would you categorize it?
Probably 7.
7? 8?
8 or 9.
Yeah? What do you think? 9 or 10?
Depends on the severity, I think, of the crash.
Well, and there are some mitigating factors. Severity of crash is actually going to change the dynamic, right? You're going to put forth a little extra effort.
Right.
But let's just say, like the run-of-the-mill, a couple people hit each other, oh, my neck hurts, right? Well, their neck didn't hurt until they found out the other guy had insurance. But their neck hurts, right? What would you say? How important do you think they are?
They're very important because you don't know if they have any medical conditions that, previous or whatnot. I mean, I treat everybody the same. And that's pretty much how, this one trained me.
To that person,
Yeah.
that crash is serious to them.
To them.
So if you take it lightly for a minor crash, to them they feel like we're not doing our job.
Mm-hmm.
So if we keep every crash at a high priority, to that person they think that we're doing our job right.
Okay. What do you think? 8?
Well, I think that's the other problem that we have that the public doesn't see, but then we don't see the public perception. We handle crashes every day. We handle fatals, some of us on a constant basis to where it's important, but it's just another crash in a day versus the public. That may be their first crash ever, or
Yeah.
their first crash in 3 years, and it's a lot more dramatic because it doesn't happen at a frequency for them like we see for us.
Go ahead. You're all right.
Okay.
You want the mic or what?
The reason why I would say I put it at an 8 is because even though there's people involved, they may be hurt. What they fail to realize is that there's other things going on in the community, such as child abductions that we have to deal with. That's like 9, 10. Officer-involved shootings, that's up there. And then right below it is a crash investigation.
Well, and I respect that, I do, but let's talk about this in relativity. How often do you have officer-involved shootings? My point to this is how often do you deal with some of these things? And I know what you're saying. Someone barricades themselves, it's a 10. Someone does something else, it's a 10. There are things that would kind of push this off to the side, but what I'm getting at is, my point though is that you're looking at crashes as a daily event. I mean, you know this. Right now, there's a crash somewhere. If we turn on the radio and listen to 98.5, I guarantee within the next 5 minutes, we're going to hear about where every crash is in the city, in the metro area, right?
Yep.
So my point to that is that this is something that's a daily grind. And for some people, it's not. I mean, I know you guys handle quite a bit. With 550 and I-25 and some of the responsibility you guys have, I know you guys go and do those things. But it may not be all the time. And some agencies don't deal with the crashes the same way that you guys might. You guys deal with a bunch. You guys deal with a bunch. I know this. But again, I don't want to take that away, but I think what I'm trying to get at is I think we have to identify where we sit with it and how we look at them. And what I'm hoping to do by the end of this class is really kind of inspire everyone to think that these are actually a little more important than maybe what we gave them credit for, because I was never taught any of this. You know, until a few years ago when I actually started first teaching this class, no one told me where the report went. I didn't know that many people saw it. I had no idea. If someone would have asked me why we do crash reports, I would have said the same thing. We do it for insurance purposes, right? That's what we do it for. That's actually not true. That's not why we do them. That was never the reason why we did them. It's just now a piece of the pie. It's a way that things are done, and it's just a part of what goes on. So I like just identifying this. I know that you know what your job is. You guys are community caretakers. Your responsibility to the citizens of where you work and where you live and what you do is important, and I know that you know that. So I don't need to remind you, but on the same note, you know, this is a piece of what happens. How many of you have been in a crash? Yeah? Scary? Anyone have a bad one? Yeah? Oh, good. Tell me about it.
Rolled over about 3 times. I was heading home, just when I was in college. I was heading home during a winter storm from Albuquerque to southeast Mexico, Loving, and
You lived in Loving?
yes, I lived
That's
in-
awesome.
And on my way there,
Lives in Loving.
the vehicle lost traction, veered to the left, and I rolled over at least 3 times. So I was transported to the hospital on that one.
Where were you when the crash happened?
Or was I? I was in the driver's seat.
Well, oh, I apologize. Like geographically in New Mexico, where were you?
Oh, I was only a mile out of Loving.
Oh, you were not far. Okay.
There's a little curve that you take, and just the vehicle lost traction on the ice, and
Off you went.
yep.
I was gonna say, because what hospital did they take you to?
Carlsbad.
Yeah. Okay. Did you ever see the report?
My father did. I didn't.
Okay. Have you guys ever seen the report that you were involved in? The crash that you were involved in? Did you ever get a copy of the report? No? What did you think?
Simple.
It wasn't bad. So they didn't do a bad job.
It was just simple.
Okay, so it wasn't. I do this class a lot, so I ask this, and it's unbelievable to me that a lot of times, even officers will throw other officers straight under the bus and say, "No, the report was horrible. I didn't get, what I expected from it." And at the time, you weren't a police officer.
No, I wasn't.
Okay, so you're just a guy
Yeah.
that rolled his car 3 times. It's unfortunate, but again, this is what we're supposed to do. And then the other thing that I wanted to talk about is collecting the data versus actually investigating the crash. You guys know you were taught how to investigate a crash. We can collect data. That's simple. My 14-year-old could do a crash report if it was just data collection. I mean, all it is driver's license, insurance, and registration, fill in some boxes, right? It's not that bad. Yeah. I need everyone to investigate the crash. What I need from everybody is I need you to put forth a little effort. I need you to identify what the marks in the road are. And I need you to take maybe a couple pictures if you think it's relevant. And I need you to put a comprehensive narrative together. And I need you to put a diagram in the report because it helps. I know that there are some agencies that don't necessarily do diagrams, even for 44s. Well, I know for 45s everyone does,
We do
but
diagrams on all of them.
We're
except
required
that's
to
a
for
delay.
44 too.
The only
Yeah.
time we don't do a diagram if it's delayed, like if they come in and it happened like 2 days ago.
okay, and that's
the
fair.
only time that they, so that's fine.
Or if the vehicles have been moved from the, we won't take measurements.
I'm going to ask you, though, to change that a little bit. I know it sounds silly, but in a lot of cases, vehicles do move out of the way, especially if you guys are doing something on 550 because they want to get out of the road. I'm fine with that. But where was the approximate point of impact? And so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is take a look at the possibility of maybe even just diagramming what the road looked like and maybe where that point of impact might have been. Sounds silly, but I'll explain why later. Do you guys do diagrams on your stuff?
We do them on it, same thing.
Okay.
If they move the vehicle before we get there, then we don't do them.
Okay.
If they stay there 44, 45, we'll do measurements.
Okay, good. The other thing that's happening is, again, little narrative and no diagram. So that ends up changing kind of the dynamic. Let's do this. Let's take 5 minutes. If you guys need the restroom, again, they're out the door down the hall. Please grab water, banana, orange, something to the effect. So I've already asked you guys this. Where do you put it on the scale of importance? And again, every agency is different. It's funny. Every time I've taught this class, I've gotten a different response. I've had guys tell me 2, 3, 4, and I get it. You know, some people it's not.
Feel better.
Well, no. And so this is the deal. A lot of times, you know, guys don't or it may not be your everyday function. It may not be your everyday responsibility. If you're in detectives or if you're in some other division, whatever the case may be, it may not be something that you have to do on a daily basis. But if it's something that you're dealing with on the regular, which in a lot of cases, especially if you're in patrol, it should be up there because we kind of minimize these things. I identified how much time is necessary to review a crash and then why is it important to complete a good review. So I'm going to make you all honorary supervisors for a little while. What I'd like to do is I'd like to review a crash report. Now in the back of your manual, if you guys will flip through that thing, in the very back, there is a crash report. I've given you the new crash report form, and in there you've got access to the report. So listen, this is what I want you to do. You guys can talk amongst yourselves. You guys can do whatever you need to do, but I need you to find any errors, any issues. I need you to tell me if you'd return this crash report back to the officer. Now, first things first, I'm going to give you number 1. What agency is this from?
San Miguel.
Hold on a minute.
Oh, San Miguel.
Hold on.
Okay. very
Double
well.
check.
Oh, it should be
San Juan.
San Juan, because it's in Farmington.
Yeah.
Okay, but shouldn't it be identified? So we don't know. Okay, so listen. The first thing on here is that we don't have an identifier as to what agency it is, right? So this becomes a problem, yes. I should just get red pens for this so everyone has the ability of going through it. Do me a favor, take the next 15, 20 minutes. You guys, like I said, talk amongst yourselves, whatever you need to do. Look through everything in the report and identify with anything that you think could be wrong with the report. All right, so listen, the crash report that's in front of you is the one that has been put out or will be being put out relatively quick. For those of you that are watching on video, again, if you could just take the 15 minutes or so to review the crash report, look through it, make sure that you identify any errors, anything that you think needs to be identified to be able to correct whatever it is that's going on. Again, when I give you guys this, what I'm hoping is that as you look it over, you'll identify with some of the items that are pertinent to being able to do a successful report. Now, just real quick, after looking at the report, would any of you turn it back? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, pretty quick, yeah. No, I made it. Yeah, no. I made this, so we're not going to do that. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you guys to go through some of the boxes with me. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go through some of these things, and as we go through them, I'm going to try and identify some of the parameters that need to be identified. If you have any questions, let me know. If you guys have anything that you want to know, just say, ask, whatever. So, we have a question.
So based on being a Trax user and that you mentioned that this is on PDF, some of the things that, like the injury stuff,
Yeah.
so if he was using a PDF,
It
is
wouldn't-
it possible that those were boxes left from a prior crash report that he completed?
Yes, absolutely. So what I did with this particular report is I generated it brand new, but the errors that you see are on purpose. Everything that I did is on purpose. So listen, to give you guys a little bit of background, what happened with this whole class was DOT contacted me and said, hey, listen, we need to put something out. We haven't never done a refresher on the crash report, and yet the crash report's actually been disseminated multiple times over the last 20 years. It's been refreshed several times. The last crash report was the 2014 or 15, I think it's 15. And you can tell by the little box up on the top corner of the report, it actually has a year on it. With that being said, there are agencies currently today using a 2009, a 2006, and I've even seen some older versions than that. The problem with that is that these reports have very specific boxes that need to be filled out. The most recent version that you guys have seen should have an interlock box on it. But there are agencies all over New Mexico that don't have, that are not using the crash report that has the interlock box on it. So,
But I think you also look at budgetary means. Every time we change the crash report, we have to buy
Okay, so this is where the cost comes in. DOT will actually ship out the report. And DOT actually has on their website the most current version of the report in Excel format. People just need to go download it. That's all it is. Just go open the file up. That's it. And a lot of agencies were unaware of this. So when I deal with some of these agencies around the state, I'm dealing with a lot of rural, small. Capitan actually has, Los Lunas. Belen is a good example too. There are agencies everywhere that the problem is that DOT will put something out and they generally send it to their emailing list. Their emailing list generally lives in the idea that they've got a current understanding of who the chief, sheriff, or whatever the case may be, or the command, whoever it may be. But that's not always the case. And what's funny about that too, no offense to the sheriffs and chiefs, I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is they don't always disseminate this stuff. They don't always put it out. So you may have gotten a new crash report and not even known that it came out. And this is where the problem lies, is that this report is coming, and because of that, they wanted to do something different this time. So with that, I have been teaching this class for a little while, but the new report's actually been in the works for almost 2 years, oddly enough. It's taken a little time. So this is how they did it. They gathered a bunch of law enforcement throughout the state. They gathered some administrators and some folks that understand and know the crash report. And what they did was they sent it out. They sent it out and they told everyone, listen, tell me what changes we need to make. And over the course of a couple of years, they started making changes. They've done some really good things. You guys are going to notice there's going to be some more boxes. There's going to be some more opportunity to put in things that are relevant to a crash. Weather, little things, some of the contributing factors. There's little things in there that lend to the idea. And I'm going to talk about every one of those things. As we go through this report, I'll identify all the little nuances and all the little new things that they did so that you guys have a better understanding. But they did that to try and make it more conducive, make it easier for the end user. Now, in the PDF version, a lot of the changes they made make sense. Even in the tracks version, though, it makes sense because it gives you the opportunity of being a little more articulate with what it was that actually occurred at the crash. Now, there are some parameters that don't allow this. Raining. When you check the box, raining, what does that mean? It was raining, right? Have you guys ever been in a downpour so heavy that you can't see 10 feet in front of you and people are pulling off to the side of the road? Right? Well, how is that different from a sprinkle? Because you checked the same box, right? Mm-hmm. Is it different?
Drizzle versus downpour.
Yeah. You get what I'm saying. The problem is there's no way to identify that. So how do you identify that? In the narrative?
Yeah, in your narrative.
In the narrative, yes. And unfortunately, there are a lot of law enforcement officers that have been taught and believe that if you check a box that you don't have to worry about it putting it in the narrative. And I understand that to some extent. Do we know what kind of intersection it is? Do we know what kind of, some of the basic parameters in those boxes are pretty easy to identify with, right? The problem is they don't give a full and complete picture. And this is the reason why the narrative and the diagram are actually really, really important. Listen, I don't know if you know this, and if you ever get the opportunity, it's actually kind of worth going to see. There's nothing to it, but UNM actually is just this big room. They have a bunch of cubicles, and it's a bunch of people that sit in this room and dissect your crash reports. And they basically go through it tooth and nail to try and extract all the information that they need. Oddly enough, every box on that report has value. Every single box, with the exception of one. You have any idea what the one is?
For them,
Yeah.
that be enforcement action taken?
No, actually, they want to know that. It's the occupation. Back in the day, NHTSA actually thought that there might be some correlation to a type of job, a type of work. Maybe even for law enforcement, you guys work graveyard, yeah. They left it on there, I think, primarily because they wanted to stay consistent with it. But, and the value could be as if they see a trend, oil field worker, something along those lines. But they have added some additional boxes that kind of lend to helping them out with, because some of it was to identify with first responders and some of those things. So we're going to talk about that as well. With that being said, this report is a mess, right? I did this on purpose, but this is what happened. UNM says, listen, hey, these are the problems that we're having. Guys aren't signing their reports. Now in tracks, it's not a problem because you guys do it automatically. You guys will do it automatically. It's going to be so cool. The other problem with these reports is all sorts of little things that we just take for granted. We just don't think it's that big of a deal, like putting none in a box. Now in tracks, you can't validate if you put something in a box that's not welcome in that box. So it doesn't let you. But in some cases, there are some things that you can put in there that would, kind of tend to. Like the unknown. I'm okay with the unknown. DOT's okay, UNM's okay with the unknown, as long as it's just the driver. If for everything else, you don't know it, just leave it blank. Look, it was a green GMC pickup truck that was involved in the crash. That's fine. But what year is it? I don't know. Don't put unknown in that box. Just leave it blank. And where am I going to describe all the parameters that I need to identify that what happened in this crash? In the narrative, right? So we're going to go back to the narrative. Every single time we're going to go back to the narrative. So take that into consideration when we go through this. All right, so first things first, we identified immediately, right? Their reporting agency, the reporting department was not on here. Is that fair? Yeah? Okay. How do we find out who the officer works for? Because he could work for a host of agencies, right? He could work for state police, he could work for San Juan County Sheriff, he can work for Farmington PD. Maybe he works for Bloomfield or Aztec. I don't think so, because where this crash actually located is not in their area, but you never know, right? So the problem is now we have to find out where Mr. Frank Sandlot works. This becomes an issue. And the reason why this is a problem is now we've tasked somebody with a job that they shouldn't have to do because someone didn't oversee the report. Now, again, I will say this multiple times. Trax will not let you validate this report. Trax would have automatically put that in there, so it wouldn't even have been an issue. The other thing that Trax does is it auto-populates some of the county stuff, so you wouldn't even have to worry about some of that stuff. If you work for San Juan County or Sandoval County, you're not getting other county identifiers for your reports. It automatically populates for you. They've done that to make it easier for you guys. All right, so the next thing is, and I kind of pointed this out already, we go into the next couple boxes. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is the first set of boxes identifies on private property and then secondary crash. Secondary crash was created so that we can identify those crashes that were a result of a primary crash. So you get called to I-25 at the 203, and you've got a vehicle versus cow. A cow got out something, and everybody wants to see that, right? Everybody wants to see that. And then somebody else decides they weren't going to pay attention and they run into the back of another vehicle. This is a secondary crash. Any crash that's a result of the primary, the first one that you respond to, we're going to identify that this was a secondary crash. What they're trying to do is, how often does this happen? Because we know it happens a lot. The problem is it's never been captured. The data's never been identified. The one thing that's really cool about this too, UNM has the ability of searching off of almost every single one of these boxes. Not all, but almost every single one of them. So if you want to know how many crashes occurred in 2017 in the state of New Mexico where it was raining, they can tell you. They can pull them all up. They can tell you. It's the craziest thing in the world, but they can tell you. You want to know how many people were pedestrians involved in crashes in they could pull it up. They just search it by that box. The secondary crash is really important. Make sure that that's identified in the report. The other thing is the on private property is not always captured correctly. If you are on private property and you're handling a crash, there's probably only a few reasons why you're doing this. One, the driver's drunk. Two, there was an injury in the crash or a pedestrian or bicyclist was involved. Other than that, in most cases, you're probably not handling them. And if you are, good for you. There's nothing that says you can't do it. But if you are going to do it, you're in the parking lot at Walmart, just make sure that you document where you are, what you're doing. Anywhere it is. Giant gas station, I don't care. If it's private property, just make sure you check the box because a lot of times it's not getting, that data is not getting collected. The next thing is the fatal injury. On that fatal injury box, for this particular crash, we're identifying that the injury was not identified, right? Because if we go down and look at the parameters of Mr. Shoemaker and Mr. Johnson, we can see that the injury code identifies that there's a B, which is apparent minor, and C, which is a complaint. But the box wasn't checked up top, right? Okay, so we need to get that fixed. So that would change the property damage only, and we would take out that 500 or more, and we'd move that over to the injury. All right. There has been some discussion about the 500 or more. We know that there's not a crash in the world anymore that's under $500. The reality is, even a side view mirror anymore is a $200 or $300 event, and if somebody hit it, then you know darn well that there's probably more damage to the other vehicle or whatever. Most cases. Now, the reality of this is that DOT wants to capture all relevant data, but if the damage is so minor, there's not a whole lot of significance to them. What they're trying to do is identify parameters that are going to help a roadway design, going to help a manufacturer design, going to help a pattern of behavior. You guys know this. When we look at at TV commercials and everything that DOT puts out, a lot of what they're talking about is cell phone usage, right? Don't talk on this. Don't talk and text. Don't text and drive. Whatever. Don't do those things. Well, those things are put out because we know that it's a problem. We know that these are things that are happening. So with that being said, those minor fender benders, those minor little ones generally are not as significant and they don't get counted. They are talking about changing that 500 to 1,000. I just don't know if the decision's been made for this particular report yet, but it's in discussion. The next thing that you're going to see is the hit and, oh, go.
So I normally put property damage because thinking that property damage is that person's vehicle and all stuff.
It is.
We were told that property damage is only like if they went into a building fence.
That's absolutely wrong. Whoever told you that was mistaken. And it's unfortunate because there's a lot of those things. We're going to talk about a lot of those things. So as those things come up, please identify them. But what you're saying is on a property damage only, you were told that the property had to be something other than the vehicle. Yeah. And that is absolutely wrong. Property is the vehicle as well. The next box is the hit and run, the school bus directly involved, school bus indirectly involved, and a commercial vehicle involved. Now, for this particular report, there is a commercial vehicle involved in this, right? So that box should have been checked. Now there is a question, and I'm guessing it's about the indirectly versus directly involved for school bus.
Not necessarily the directly, but the indirectly. Because then, at that point, I put the school bus is indirectly involved. Is that typical officer now going to put that bus as
A vehicle in
a
the crash.
vehicle, which realistically,
Well, so you know this just as well as I do. The fact of the matter is that every crash is going to be different. And what they were trying to identify with is a school bus goes and throws out its sign and expects people to stop because there's kids walking across, and sure enough, someone disregards it, goes around and unbelievably enough strikes a child or something to that effect.
okay, so they're looking
Now-
at that type of situation, not,
Well,
you're the bus driver, you stopped to let kids out, and I'm not paying attention, I rear end the car that's behind you. So both of us pull off, but then the school bus leaves.
yeah, no, and that's a good identifier as well, because that needs to be identified. Now, this is where the understanding of, and I kind of want to just throw the idea of common sense into this. If the school bus is not directly involved, then we're generally not going to be taking the information from the driver and the bus and everything else. In your circumstance is a really good example. But there should be something that identifies that this is what was going on at the time of the crash. And so yes, putting that in there is what they're looking for. So check the box indirectly involved and then put in the narrative something that identifies what it was that was actually going on. Because that's a really good point. And identifying with that is where what we're trying to do is collect that data. So what you're going to find in a lot of these things is there was a lot of data that was not being collected. I'm going to get to the box here in a minute about first responders. That was never collected, but it happens. It happens actually pretty frequently. We'll talk about that. Case number. For every agency, it's a little bit different. What they're basically looking for is what identifier do you have? If you guys have something specific, then that's fine. The crash report number is going to auto-populate. You don't have to worry about that. In Trax, it auto does. In the PDF version, you are going to have to put it in. If you do have to use the PDF version, those numbers are given to you guys by DOT. That should be something that is regulated with either within dispatch or some kind of level of supervision, whatever. I have seen agencies do a lot of different things with these. I'm going to talk about it in a minute. But there are agencies throughout New Mexico that do things a little bit different. So I'll hit on that here in a second.
So does that number sign throw anything at UNM for a tizzy?
You know what? I have not gotten any feedback on that yet. That is a great question, but I do not know. And generally, no, you don't want to put the number sign in there. So that would be an area of, just put the number. There's no reason to put the actual number because it says case number right before it. The agency code, they do now have a drop down for every single agency in New Mexico. So from JAL to San Miguel to Quemado to, it doesn't matter where you are, there is an agency code for every single one of those. Now what's funny about this is, and you guys know this, whenever you do a drop down and you're in a hurry, you have the ability of missing something. Do you know how many cities and counties start with SAN?
Sandoval, Santa Fe, Santa Ana.
There's a bunch, right? There's a bunch. Sandia, San Miguel, San Juan, San Felipe, there's a ton of them, right? And so thinking about that, if you're just scrolling down and you click on a box, and again, there was a reason why I did this, because agencies statewide are doing this. And it wasn't necessarily on this particular box, because this particular box is relatively new. This is new. But the fact of the matter is, when you do any kind of scroll down, it affects that. Now, for you guys, it's not an issue. You guys already have, in tracks, it's not even it won't mess with you. You'll be fine. It does change, though, the parameter for you. Well, yours should auto-populate state police, but I think there's different areas, right?
Different areas, but, and I'll test it when I work on the new crash report, if that's one of those default fields that the officer can make a default.
I'm almost positive that you can.
So I'd make my selection the very first report, and then every report that I create after that, it should recognize, hey, he selected as a default field, this is what he selected as a default.
Yeah, and it shouldn't be that big of a deal. The CAD number, again, whatever your dispatch identifies and whatever you guys use is fine. That's another box that's basically up to you. Crash date, military time, city occurred in. So we know this occurred in Farmington. We know that it occurred in the county of San Juan. So we know that either Farmington PD, State Police, or San Juan County probably handled the crash. So we can narrow it down a little bit. It identifies the crash occurred on Thursday on East Main Street and North Cochiti Avenue. And then it goes into other location. And I want to talk about other location for a minute. So it identifies that it's 0.3 of a mile east of fire hydrant number 6732. What do you guys use for your other location?
Probably things we shouldn't.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad that it's identified like that, because the fact of the matter is we're using things that we shouldn't.
Delineator pole.
Well, I'll tell you what, you'd be actually kind of surprised. The problem with most of what we use is that it cannot be searched. So we live in a digital world, and because we live in a digital world, it has to be able to be searched. And what I'll reference it later as is a Googleable reference. I know it's not a word, but my point to this is if you can't search for it on the web, then don't put it on here as your other location. Now that changes when we do the diagram. Use whatever. The diagram's a little bit different. Try and find something substantial that's going to be there for some period of time. And if it's a fire hydrant, I'm absolutely fine with that. But when it comes to the other location on the report, please do not use fire hydrants, telephone poles, bridges, any of those things. They're all numbered. You know this, right? All utility poles have some kind of stamp on them or a number or a plate or something. Fire hydrants, I didn't know this. They're numbered. Bridges, they actually are numbered. They have numbers to them. The problem with it is you can't search for any one of those items on the web. There's no database categorized anywhere for any of those items. And I don't know, it may be a New Mexico thing, I don't know, but in New Mexico, you can't search for these things. So this is where the problem herein lies. Oh, so listen, you can use an intersection.
If it's an intersection, they just have us repeat it on there and just put the same intersection.
Okay.
Is that right?
Well, we'll just talk about that for a second. No. So this is the whole point of this is that when this report goes to UNM and it goes to anywhere else, what they're trying to do is they're trying to identify where the problem is. So the issue then becomes, how do we identify that location? So there's a few things that we can do. In tracks, you guys have the ability of pin mapping. You can actually go into tracks, put the pin on where the crash actually occurred, and they updated in I believe, one of the last tracks packs, correct?
It's under the literal description.
Yeah,
And then you press the little thing where it says locate.
yes. And you have the ability,
Map, you put it right where you want it, and then it takes you to your, and it logs your GPS, your intersection, and how many miles you are from a certain intersection.
it gives you everything. Yes. Yes. Know
I
this.
did not know this. I
Go.
always use my phone.
There are, well, the last one, if I'm not mistaken, I thought it was fixed, but the last one, if you put it too close to an intersection, it would actually categorize the crash in the intersection and fill in all the boxes. But I think they got that fixed, right?
I think they did, but the bigger problem I thought was, so if I was off the intersection, how do okay, that 3 millimeters looks like we're 300 feet from the,
Yeah.
so it still throws it off. So I usually just enter in
The data.
the GPS coordinates from like the CAD or something, and
We're going to talk about that.
We
here.
can-
So what I do is there's a little back row in there that says measure. And I click on that and it'll bring you like a little line that you can pull.
Mhm.
It stretches and it tells you exactly how many feet or how many is you're away from that certain distance.
Oh, good. Okay. And that's going to be a big deal because the fact of the matter is the other location is meant to be a reference marker to better identify where the crash actually occurred. So for a lot of crashes, when we're talking about intersections and such, they're not in the intersection. Most crashes actually happen either before or after, or whatever the case may be. But with that said, how far is it? Are they 1 car deep, 2 cars deep, 5 cars deep, 12 cars deep? And that 12 cars deep is, 120, 150 feet, somewhere in there. So how do we identify that? How do we put that on there? Well, so the bigger issue now is trying to pinpoint where that actual happened. So we get into lat and long. We'll get into the GPS coordinates. But before we do that, I want to make sure that it's clear that if you guys are using something else, try and identify something that is tangible and find something else. If you have to drive another mile or two to get to another intersection or get to a milepost or whatever the case may be, then please do. I know there's
Our
some,
biggest issue is that we don't do measurements on 44s.
yeah,
So that's another how it falls in, how are you supposed to get the miles and the feet if we don't?
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
So even if it's just using our wheel and going to like the closest mile marker and then just doing that.
yeah. Well, and you guys know this too. There's 10th in a lot of areas. It's not everywhere, but in a lot of areas there's 10th markers as well. Okay, so if you have the ability of doing that and measuring that out to that location, that's great.
Yeah.
But if it has to be another intersection or something else, then please. And like I said, even if it has to be like 2.3 miles from whatever. Yes, sir.
Do they have a problem if we utilize our vehicle and go to trip A, reset it,
No.
and then go
That-
to find that milepost or whatever?
It's not an issue at all. Again, I'm trying to get to the best we can, the best location. Listen, GPS is not required yet. Lat and long is not a requirement on a report.
Oh, it is for us.
Good.
It
It's
is for
not.
us. Yeah.
DOT hasn't made it mandatory yet.
Trax has made it mandatory.
Well, Trax may automatically put it in, but in some cases, I've actually found where some agencies in Trax are not putting it. Especially if they're not using that pin mapping piece or that mapping piece. I'm glad you guys use it, but let me ask you this: where do you get your actual?
GPS.
Okay, so you go to your GPS in the car. Where's your car sitting at the time where you get it?
Not where it happened.
Yeah, so I need to fix that. I absolutely need you guys to fix that because I need you to get the GPS coordinates from the approximate point of impact. Whatever you think that
And I
is.
always wondered that, but that's the way we were told to do it.
I know,
You know what I mean? It's
I
kinda
know.
like that's not where it happened.
Well, no, and I know, and that's exactly why this class is here, is because there's a lot of things that we were told, hey, this is what you're supposed to do. And, questions like this come up, there was no property damage. Yeah, there was. These are all things that we need to kind of work through because these are all things that are actually happening. And so when these reports are getting kicked in, they're seeing all sorts of like, hey, that's not okay. So yes, when you guys get your GPS coordinates, would you please do me a favor and try and get it to as close as you possibly can to the actual approximate point of impact or first harmful event. And I'm going to talk about that in a
Even
minute.
at that point, you need to know where the GPS antenna is on your car, because if you pull the front tire to the impact and your GPS antenna is on the trunk,
This is my suggestion.
Well, the problem is sometimes, yeah, and I was just
Yeah.
gonna say that, but usually where crashes occur, there's no signal.
Yeah, you
So we
guys do
to
have
use
some
our
rural.
GPS in our car, you
All
know
right.
what I mean?
Yeah, so get it as close as you possibly
Okay,
can.
okay.
And when we're talking about feet, I don't know that it's going to be as critical because basically what the information is used for is to identify how many times do we have crashes at this particular point. And if you guys go to the maps, and you know what I'll do is I'll see if I can't pull up UNM's website, but if you pull up any map that UNM has, every one of them has a set of dots. And those dots are particular to how many crashes occurred in an area. So a yellow dot may be 1 to 3 crashes, an orange dot may be 4 to 6 crashes, and anything higher than that is a big red dot. And so they want to know where these crashes are happening so that we can identify with, you know, what's going on and how it's going. Yes, sir.
One of the issues I've had is when I've located and put in the literal description, it's given me a different name for a road than what it's supposed to be called.
you know, like especially the interstates with the bridges and exits.
How would we, and it won't let me change it on the literal description because it's already set. How would we go about, it lets me change it on top though, but it's not in there. How would we go about?
You have a tracks administrator within your organization. I don't know who does it for you because I don't know that they're on the calls in most cases.
So I think they would just be a representative because they're on the DPS server.
I know our admin girl will message somebody, and I can't think of his name, but she talks to him whenever
Okay.
there's issues.
So generally what will happen is it'll go to a gentleman by the name of Chris Mead or Brian Bullard. They both oversee all the tracks parameters. Chris is generally the one that's going to be looking at those things to identify, to see what the fix is, and then it gets sent to TEG, which is the company that oversees these things. If you are having an issue like that, this is my suggestion. You go to your admin and request that they send an email to Chris Smead or Brian Bullard and see about getting that fixed, because that is something that can be corrected.
It might be DOT's literal description.
It very well could be, but again, it's something that if you can identify specific locations, they could probably go in and fix those. It just, I think it needs to be made aware to them so that they know that that's what's going on. All right, so with that, the Latin long, again, if you could do me a favor, try and get it as close to the approximate point of impact or the first harmful event. Now, you're going to hear first harmful event a bunch from here on out. The first harmful event has now been identified as the crash classification. It's changed. It used to be crash classification, which is the next box, right? So you've got crash occurred, and we are going to identify if it's on roadway, off roadway, or a non-traffic way. Some non-traffic ways, maybe a sidewalk, maybe an off-road path of some sort, maybe. There's several different things because we generally have identified on-roadway, off-roadway, but there's going to be a few things out there that might be identified as a non-traffic way. If that's the case and it fits into whatever parameter it is that you're working with this crash, then please just check that box. But I think it's going to be few and far between, especially for what you guys do. The next thing identifies work zone construction, work zone maintenance, and work zone utility. Now, this seems kind of silly. Why don't we just check the box for work zone? Well, there are some differences. They want to know what's going on. If this is a work zone construction, generally we can see them in this zone for weeks, right? I mean, this could be something where we have orange barrels up for quite some time. With that being said, there's also the parameter of the other two pieces. Can we take just a couple minute break? Sure. Okay. So we were on here, we were looking at, we were talking about the literal description. Sean was able to show me that, so absolutely check that out. Now, I was talking about the construction, maintenance, and utility. Construction is generally, it's more of a long term. There's something going on. You're gonna see barrels for a few days, weeks, whatever it may be. When you're talking about maintenance, you're talking about something that's a very short-term deal. It just popped up. Like we got notice that they're gonna do some little pothole repair or something like that. Something that's gonna take just a short period of time. And then the utility, You're generally seeing either underground or overground. It's something that generally takes maybe a few hours. In some cases, it may be a little bit longer, but it doesn't change the dynamic of the roadway a whole lot, depending on what kind of parameters that are actually going on. The fact of the matter is they want to know these things because they want to know how it affects traffic. How are these things changing the traffic dynamic? Are they causing these things? Is there an issue? Is there something that can be done to better improve the way that these things are going? With that being said, the next item is the tribal land. Now, you guys deal with it. You guys don't have any, okay, not within the city. And you deal with it on the regular. So again, if you guys can identify if it's tribal land or not, that'd be appreciated. Then we get into the first harmful event. There is the collision with a motor vehicle, collision with person, collision with animal, collision with fixed object, non-collision, collision with other non-fixed object, or other. Specify a narrative. What they did was they changed up the way the analysis code is identified. The analysis code correlates with the first harmful event or the crash occurrence, the crash identifier. With that being said, what they're looking for is, what is the first harmful event? Now, there's been some question about this. I'm driving down the road. I am on a road that's wet. The road's a little slick. I accelerate. The back tires get a little loose. I start to fishtail. As I'm fishtailing, I lose control of the vehicle. I strike the curb. The back tire blows. I lose control, and the car spins around and hits a telephone pole. At what point is the first harmful event? Well, for most of us, we would kind of lend to the idea that the fishtailing is what led to the crash, which would be identified as the first harmful event. But what they're actually asking for is, where did the crash occur? What was the first harmful, damageable? Yes. So striking the curb and blowing the tire is actually your first harmful event. It's going to be your first approximate point of impact, and that's where you're going to want to get your GPS, your latitude and longitude from. This is a little bit different. I know this. But again, it goes under that same as the crash classification, and it goes under the same as that whole thing. And the idea behind this is that we have the ability of identifying where this particular was, what was going on, how it was going on. What's really cool about this, in the PDF version, it actually gives you drop downs. So because I identified a collision with a motor vehicle, it then gives you the ability of putting in the manner of impact and the manner of crash. Now, if I would have put a collision with a person, those boxes would have been different. Now, you remember in the analysis code before, you would have a drop down, and that drop down allowed you the ability of having a ton of different parameters. If it was a crash with another motor vehicle, you had like 0, 1 through 18 that you had the ability of picking from. Well, what they did was they changed that. They took that completely out and they moved that over here so that it minimizes that and makes it a little more specific. So with that being said, then it goes over to the analysis code. The analysis code allows you now with only a couple of codes, and then it gives you the location of the first harmful event. So with all this being said, it kind of changed the dynamic of how this goes, but the hope is that it's going to make it easier for the end user. Now for you guys in tracks, a lot of this stuff is negated. As soon as you identify what the crash classification is, it's going to give you the next box, which is the manner of crash. And then it's going to give you the next box, which is the manner of impact, or vice versa. You will have a set of categories to drop down from. You'll have a set of ideas or parameters that it will give you. And then you have the ability of filling in based on what was relative to the crash that you guys in fact worked. The idea behind this was to make it easier for the end user. The idea behind it was to make it easier for the reader as well. So now we have a better understanding of how the crash occurred, what was going on, and what were the different parameters behind it. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. If you do, don't sweat it. You can always ask later. Some of these things are going to come up, and it's just the way that it is. All right, so now we get into the vehicle number 1. If you guys turn your report kind of sideways, they identified on the top, vehicle number 1, number of occupants. What they're looking for is how many occupants were in the vehicle. You've got a driver and no passengers, so we've got 1 occupant, right? If there are multiple occupants, you have the ability of putting it on there. Now, the reason why this is so significant is we have a van, and in the van there's 12 people. But we can't put 12 people on here on the PDF version of the report, at least on the front page. The only thing we can put on here is the 4 that are on there, right? The second page, I don't know if you guys picked this up already or not, but do you notice something glaringly missing? There used to be a box that allowed you the ability of putting a narrative or a diagram, right? Yeah, it's gone. They took care of that. They got rid of it. Yes, I agree. One of the things they did was they allowed additional occupants. So you have the ability of putting additional occupants in there. But again, what that does is it allows the reader to understand you should be looking for 12 people's names regarding that they were all involved in this crash, because it's identified that there was 12 persons as occupants in this particular vehicle. So again, paying attention to that, that's important. So that was left out. One of the new boxes is it asks for MV unit type. In this particular case, it identifies motor vehicle in transport, right? What is motor vehicle in transport?
Any vehicle that's in transport?
Yeah, just driving. It's funny because we think in transport, we almost think that it's on some carrier. It's on a carrier, yeah, right? And so because of that, we get lost in this idea of what actual transport is. All it is that the vehicle is in operation. So, in motion helps, but it also, you've got to be kind of cautious with this. At an intersection when you're stopped and someone runs into you from behind, you're still a motor vehicle in transport, right? The only time that you're not in transport, if you're parked on the side of the road, the vehicle's unoccupied or whatever. And that is the other option for that particular thing, is it identifies parked motor vehicle. Then it goes into the direction that the vehicle was headed. So this vehicle was west on East Main Street. We have boxes that allow us the ability of putting left to the scene of the crash. Then we have the posted speed and the safe speed. What's a safe speed?
That one always gets me. Like, who are we to know what's safe?
So,
I'm going to tell you who you are.
It drives
No.
it just drives me nuts.
I'm going to tell you who you are. Listen, in most cases, and for particularly this crash, this is a no-brainer, right? What's the safe speed?
Well,
the posted speed, which is 35.
Well, and I think you also have to look.
Weather.
I actually went
yeah.
back and looked at the weather conditions, the type of road it was, and based on what he put, there shouldn't be any issues, so safe speed should
Should be
the posted
35?
speed.
The posted speed. No, and that's exactly
Because
what it
winter, my
is.
changes just depends on the weather.
The weather.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I've done this on purpose. You know this. The fact is this happens a lot. How do we determine what a safe speed is?
Usually it was
How long
the
have-
speed it took us to safely get there.
That I love that.
Yeah, that's true.
How long have you been doing this?
3 years.
3 years.
Going on 5.
5?
12.
10.
You an admin? Good. How long have you been doing that?
She has tons of questions after this.
Yes.
Good. No, that's
Ask them,
good.
girl, ask them. We're taking notes over here.
Yeah, no. Okay. And you've got 18. Days, you're old. Is that all that gray? Your training and experience has led you to believe that you know that when it rains heavily that you need to slow down. You know this because it lends to the idea that you can be in better control of in operation of your vehicle. Your training and experience is what lends to the idea of what a safe speed is. Now, it's not science. There's nothing that says that if it's snowing, you have to go 10 miles an hour less. There's no such thing, so that doesn't exist. Well, what does is your understanding of how vehicles operate, what they do when they slide off the road, how they slide off the road, and how people can better control them if they slow their speed down. If the snow is so heavy, which we've seen some really good snowstorms out on I-40, if the snow is so heavy that you can't see the road any longer, then a safe speed may very well be 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour. In most cases, though, if it's raining or something like that, we could drop it 5, 10, 15 miles an hour, and that would still be considered. Listen, what I'm trying to tell you is look at this from the understanding of what is reasonable. What would be reasonable to you? What do you think would be identifiably reasonable so that it's not a problem? And that's what I'm looking for. With that said, the safe speed in most cases is going to be the posted speed limit, and that's because we can identify that that's what DOT has identified and given that roadway designation, and it's fair and it's equitable.
Unless he somehow said that there was
Some other issue,
crap load of pedestrians or
potholes, issues, anything, yes. If there's some other mitigating circumstance that lends to the idea that there's an issue, then yeah, we'll generally put that. All right, so in this particular crash, Mr. Shoemaker lives on 1650 East Hopi Street. He's got a driver's license number that's one too many characters. Right? Okay, good. Little things, right? We don't think about these things, but if someone's not paying attention and they double click a number or their fingers, guys aren't always paying attention, so this becomes a problem because now we're trying to collect data that is no longer accurate, and it changes the dynamic of how we get this stuff.
However, using the tracks should.
You wouldn't, yeah,
maybe they're
it
scanning
takes
and
that.
reporting some leads.
Yes, which is awesome. We've got everything on here is no CDL, status is valid. He's got restrictions for corrective lenses, no endorsements. We know that his driver's license expired 2 months ago, and he didn't issue a citation or make any note of it, so that might be something that we'd want to identify. City, state, Farmington, zip code, phone number's fine, date of birth's fine, sales director, and then we get to this incident responder box. Now, the idea behind this is we need to capture some different data. Several years ago, we were out in Moriarty, Edgewood area, and down south there was a bus crash. I think it was down by Carrizozo or something like that. Major bus crash. Tons of people were injured. It had snowed. And EMS was responding. One of the ambulances actually wrecked on the way out there. They rolled the bus over somewhere outside of Moriarty. This happens. We know that it happens. And what they're trying to identify with is how often does this happen? The problem with it is they can identify that you've been in a crash. Has anyone been in a crash on duty? Yeah? Were you responding to something, or was it just someone ran into you? Oh, great.
Somebody running into you.
Have you ever had a crash on duty? Yes?
He's a jerk. I was backing up and slowly backing up, and I hit a fire hydrant.
Okay.
My country says too early back.
Slow. I was really cautious as I was backing my vehicle. No, and I'm sure you were. The fact of the matter, though, that's not an incident response. You weren't going to a call. You weren't running to a call. And so this is what we're looking for. NHTSA and DOT have basically said, listen, we need to categorize these things so that we can identify how we might be able to better serve these types of incidents. What can we do to make these better? Is it a training issue? Is it a driving issue? Is it a weather issue? Is it something else going on? How do we make things better? Is it that police need better lights, or maybe a different set of lights, or what? Backup cameras. Little things like this actually have value to NHTSA to identify with how these things happen. So if you guys are working a crash, and I don't care if it's a volunteer firefighter from somewhere up in Cuba that's responding, if they're responding to an incident, and I don't care if it's a crash or a fire or barricaded, so I don't care what they're responding to. If you can articulate they were responding to a call for service as a first responder, then I'm going to ask you to put yes in that box. It's only a yes or no, so it's not a big deal. The next box seems silly, but it's probably one of the more important boxes on this whole stinking report. Where the driver was sitting. Now, the reason why this is so important is because it actually lends the idea of a lot of different things. You will actually put in here PC if it's a pedestrian cyclist, or excuse me, a pedal cyclist. You will put PD in there if it's a pedestrian. There's several different codes that actually fit in that box, oddly enough, which they give you the different seating parameters. But if they're the driver, they only usually have two options. And the second option's only in postal vehicles in most cases, or unless the vehicle came from Europe. On occasion, you'll see one. Someone's driving on the wrong side of their car. It happens. Again, most of the time they're delivering mail, but for the rest of those, they're just weird. With that being said, the next few boxes are all pretty simple. Age, sex, race, injury code, op used properly, airbag deployed, ejection. Does anyone know what the airbag F is? Frontal. Perfect, yeah. You know what? I don't expect you guys to know the codes. You don't need to know them in and out, but you do have access to them. And on the PDF format, it comes up. And in the tracks format, it actually gives you the options in front of your face as it pulls up each category, so you don't have to worry about it. The one that's important to me and I want to identify is the EMS number. If EMS responds, please fill out that box. I don't care what you put, as long as it relates to that bus. It doesn't matter if it's Fire 1 or EMS 1 or 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't care, as long as it correlates to that particular responder. Now, the reason why this is an issue is if we have to go back, and have any of you ever been deposed in a crash? Have you been? You've gotten lucky then. Do you remember Stan Lundy's crash? Were you out there with me?
No.
I got deposed several years ago. We had a, they're now CVE. We had a motor trans guy that was involved in a crash. He was working a crash and he got hit. So what happened was this kid was coming over the hill at Klein's Corners and the road was ice. Well, the young man didn't know what to do. He hit the brakes. Well, the vehicle spins around. He T-bones a parked car. No joke. The driver's side of his car hit the back of the police car, pushed the police car into the roadway, and a semi clipped the front of it. Windows all got shattered. The wind is blowing 90 miles to 100 miles an hour. Snow still blowing. The car that hit him initially went down into the ditch, so now we're dealing with those two down there. The semi-truck driver is down the road about a half a mile to a mile, and we're dealing with that. So I write this report. Now, I put a lot of effort into this. It was a fellow law enforcement officer. I did probably a 6-page narrative on this. I documented everything because it was pretty complex. I mean, the fact was he was already on scene. He was off the road. He got hit, got pushed into traffic, got hit again. It was a mess. He got trapped in the car.
Baron with us? You got hit?
Yeah.
On I-25?
Yep.
During that snowstorm? Got
Yes, yeah.
State police took that one, I think.
Yes,
Yeah.
they did. And it was very similar. I mean, the idea behind kind of how the whole thing went. Well, with that being said, I got deposed. I got asked to go and give deposition. Now, for you guys, you know this. What's really cool about this, you take the day off and you go in your civvies and they pay you the $200 or $300 or $400 they think that you're worth, and you sit there for the few hours that you need to justify whatever. Well, I went in there, and the attorney for the officer, he had 2. The attorneys for the trucking company was 3 or 4, and the attorney for the driver that actually hit him initially was 2. I'm sitting in a room with like 7 attorneys, and they all had questions. Now, on the other side of the fence, I'm dealing with these 5 attorneys, 6 attorneys, whatever it was, that are just grilling me about my relationship with him and how I could have maybe embellished the report a little bit because I'm favoring one of my own. And how often did we eat together? How often did I go to his house? Do I know where he lives? Do I know how many kids he has? Do I know?
At that point, you know you did a good crash report because
Yeah.
Because they're just trying to make it.
Well, and you're right, but they did, and they go, and so, and there is value to that, because the fact was I put a lot of effort into that. And yeah, I spent 6 hours in that room listening to questions and answering questions about what my investigation entailed, how many investigations I had done, everything that you could think of. And again, a lot of the focus was our relationship, because they were trying to say that I favored him and embellished the report or made the report more favorable. The benefit to this whole thing was the driver that had caused the crash originally, his wife told him that he needed an attorney. I went to the ER and I said, well, sir, I'd like to get a statement from you. And he says, well, my wife says that I need an attorney. Okay, you just, good luck with that. The next thing is the passenger. We've got something identified as right front, and then we've got a none, right? First of all, the right front shouldn't even be identified on there. Trax wouldn't allow this, so we know that. Trax would totally kick the report saying it's an invalid response, so we wouldn't have that. But the none is what I was talking to you guys about earlier. By putting the word none in there, it's like putting the word Prince or Madonna or whatever that no one knows. You know what's funny? I've taught this class multiple times, and the last class I taught was down at JAL, and one of the guys identified his uncle is Noni, and it's spelled N-O-N-E. No way, your uncle's name is None. That's legit. Noni was in a crash. The problem is that None has identified a passenger in like a ton of crashes last year, like a lot. And so the problem then becomes, well, we were always taught that we had to put something in there. Well, so this is what's going to happen from here on out. Don't do that. And I'm really reinforcing this for the online community, because the fact is, if you're on Trax, it doesn't give you that option. It just goes by it. You don't even see it, so it's not even an issue. But the problem is, when you're working with a PDF version of this report, you have the ability of putting in those parameters. So if you have a report, don't put something in there if it doesn't pertain or it doesn't need to go in there. And none is one of those things. All right, so we've got vehicle year, vehicle make, model, color, body style. Then we go into cargo body type, vehicle use 1, vehicle use 2, and vehicle use 3. Cargo body type is pretty identifiable, and I'm going to read you some of the codes just real quick. Cargo body type, auto transporter, bus, van, 9 to 15 passengers or 16 plus, cargo tank, concrete mixer, dump, flatbed, garbage refuge, hopper, intermodal chassis, log truck, no cargo, pole, other van, enclosed box, or vehicle towing another vehicle. Then we go into vehicle use 1, which identifies ambulance, church bus, construction maintenance, charter, fire, incident response, intercity bus, military, shuttle bus, police, patrol vehicle. It gives all sorts of other parameters, right? Then vehicle use 2 is commercial or business use, government use, personal use, rental truck, or unknown. Now, TRAX is got a bit of a flaw in this because it generally asks you to put what that category is in order to get the rest of the boxes to appear. So you have to put P. The problem with this is, and it's been identified, but there's a couple caveats to this, so I'm going to tell you. P is identified for a commercial vehicle that is being used for personal use. So, trucker Billy Bob pulls into the Walmart in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. He drops his trailer and he decides that he wants to go get something to eat. He bobtails, just the truck, no trailer on there. He bobtails down to Dairy Queen, gets himself a delicious meal, and on his way out of the parking lot of the Dairy Queen, he gets hit. You get there, you take the report. Now you're going to document the vehicle to the best of your ability. He doesn't have a trailer, so it's just the truck. You're going to document all the parameters of the truck and any other commercial issue that you need to identify because it's a commercial vehicle. But what is its current use? He's not on the clock. He's not on duty time, so it's identified as personal, right? We get lost in this sometimes too because we often think commercial motor vehicles are primarily just big trucks, and they're not. UPS has a fleet of vans and box trucks that are used for commercial use only. They don't use them for anything else. Police cars, although identified as government and classified as government, are still under the same premise as used commercially. Taxis, limos, all sorts of stuff. Now we get into some parameters that are a little bit questionable. Taxis are one thing because they're identifiable, but Uber and Lyft now become kind of an issue, right? So we have to kind of figure out what that parameter is and how that fits, if in fact it does fit. With that being said, right now, what I'm going to tell you is just be wary of using some of those, but if it is a commercial vehicle, if it's a vehicle used for commercial purposes, I need you to put some of these things in here. Now, this is where it gets kind of funny. For those of users that are using the PDF version, we always want to put in the number of axles. But in TRAX, if it's not identified as a commercial vehicle, it doesn't give you the number of axles. So don't fill it in unless it's a commercial vehicle. The same thing with that P. Now, I'm going to tell you, I don't know that TRAX is going to change that, and that's okay. Because if it's identified as a P, the only parameter is that someone has to understand that this is not a commercial vehicle, but in looking at it in the digital world, it recognizes it in the system as wanting to know where the rest of the information is in the system. So I'm going to ask you all to refrain from using the P, with the exception knowing that in TRAX you have to in order to get the boxes to populate for everything else. Yes, sir.
Is there any other box you would suggest other than the
Well, the only other option that you really have,
for personal owned vehicles?
well, so the only reason why you would need to identify personal vehicle is if it's a commercial vehicle being used for personal use. Otherwise, all personal vehicles are used for personal use, right? Yeah, so in this particular matter, what we would do is don't put the P. So if you're using the PDF, don't do vehicle use 2 unless it's a commercial vehicle. Now, in TRAX, like I said, it will not validate. You will not get the boxes you need unless you put that P in there, which is fine. It's not going to change anything necessarily, other than someone somewhere down the road is going to have to do a little more work to identify that this is not a commercial vehicle, that in fact it is just someone in their personal vehicle and it was just miscategorized. It's not the end of the world, but to be right in the way that we do it, which because you're on tracks you can't, don't put the P.
So in all reality, it's cargo body type. Because usually when I do private vehicles, I would say no cargo body or not applicable, because it's not applicable.
Yeah.
But now you're saying that I should almost leave that box and then vehicle use 2 blank,
Yeah,
because they're not.
if it's not a
they're
commercial vehicle.
Specifically pertaining to commercial vehicles.
Yeah, and there's several of those boxes that are going to follow. So again, and you know this because if you are in tracks, and if I'm not mistaken, does it give you cargo body type?
Yeah,
It does. Okay.
And I usually do what he just said.
Okay.
They
And I'm
also
going to,
have us fill out the vehicle 1 and 2. Like, we always have to fill those.
well, I know because that's the way that tracks was designed. So, and it is something that's been brought up, but I don't know that it's a quick fix on that particular thing, because the way they designed tracks was that those boxes indicate other boxes. And if those don't get filled out, then you don't have the ability of filling in the others. I'm telling you now, if you don't put in vehicle use 2, then it doesn't give you the information for all the other parameters. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's what it is.
But you can skip vehicle 1, right, and go to vehicle 2, or no?
You're gonna have to just check
I
it.
think you can, but,
I thought you could.
yeah, because it doesn't make sense to me why they're making us fill out both if we can just skip.
Well, I'm gonna tell you, for vehicle use 1, you do not need to put it in unless it's a commercial vehicle.
See, and it gets kicked back. Our reports get kicked back.
Yeah.
Put something in there.
Well, and if that's the case, then do what you're currently doing. But I'm going to tell you, this is where the problem lies. If I don't have supervisors in this class, then we're going to have issues. We're going to
Right.
continue because they don't understand. They don't
Right.
know. Listen, you all have my phone number. You have my email. Whether you believe it or not, it's on the front of the manual that I gave you. You have access. You can call me. If I can't answer the question for you immediately, or your supervisor, I will get an answer. You can also call DOT. The folks up at DOT have a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this stuff, and they'll generally give you some good direction as to what you need to do and how you need to do it.
Well, I think it's, a little bit off the subject. I think we've gone enough years without having a refreshed crash report guide.
Yeah.
This is what goes in this box. If this doesn't pertain, leave it blank.
Yeah. Well, and you are very unique in that you've seen the new crash report manual. Nobody else has. And with that, with the new crash report manual, it will give direction on a lot of those things. So there is a lot more guidance when it comes to some of these little parameters. All right, the next thing is the towed and the damage extent and that. So again, if the vehicle was towed, you're going to put yes or no. You're going to identify the damage. In this particular case, it was identified as slight and the extent is minor. If you'll notice though, the boxes checked on the actual vehicle description is opposite, so they're wrong. That needs to be fixed. Then we go into US DOT, state, those things, number of axles. All that stuff, excuse me, is all commercial vehicle related. Now when it comes to the owner of the vehicle, in most cases that's generally what they're looking for is the owner of a commercial vehicle, because in most cases it's not always the driver. But for purposes of completing the report, it may ask you and it may require you, especially in tracks. If it does, just put it in. But do me a favor, and I don't think it allows you the ability of putting same as above, does it? I don't think it does. Yeah, I don't think so. So what I'm going to tell everyone doing the PDF version is don't put same as above, because it recognizes that as the address. What's funny is 1650 East Hopi is actually shorter than same as above. There's less characters. It would take you less time to actually put the address in than it would to. My point to this is it's often used as a quick way to identify, okay, it was the address that was used above. That's all great, but same as above, there's same as above in Belen, Los Lunas, Albuquerque, Corrales, Bernalillo, Rio Rancho. You wouldn't believe where same as above is because it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So it becomes a problem.
And how does the, so like going back further up in the first box, we have occurred on and we spelled out East Main Street. And then we go down to vehicle 1 and we say that it occurred, or the vehicle's traveling on E. Main Street. So I would have kicked that back for consistency, but there's the computer.
The computer's not going to make a difference between the two, and I'm glad you brought that up. Consistency is important, but it's as long as it's reasonable. You know what E. Main Street is versus East Main Street. But yes, it may be just one of those little things. For the supervisors, the recommendation is trying to make it as consistent as possible. And for those that actually work and do these things on a regular, you're going to find that they're going to keep it as consistent as possible. But in some cases, that's not always the case. So that was an unintentional on my part. I didn't even notice that. So I'm glad you brought it up. All right. VIN looks okay, everything else looks okay. We've got towed by and towed to. Again, the NA needs to go away. Just leave it blank. This vehicle wasn't towed. We know that because it identifies in the boxes above, so no one's expecting anything to be in those boxes. Now, this is where supervision gets a little hinked up because they seem to think that something needs to be put in there. Don't put anything in there. Leave it blank. Company NA did not tow the vehicle, and that's what it's going to show. That NA towed it to NA. Well, what is that? We know what it means, but the computer doesn't. You were going to ask.
Yes, if the vehicle is towed, then the vehicle goes into the license plate and the make, license year, state, license number goes into the box.
No. So that is if there's a trailer or some other towed vehicle by that vehicle. So if vehicle 1, which is a Challenger, actually had a tow hitch and was pulling a U-Haul or a motorcycle or whatever, then we have put those parameters down in those boxes below.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, right above you were talking about the owner's name?
Yes.
So we can put, if there's no business, we can put the actual owner of the Charger?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
And that's what you're probably being told to do.
Yeah.
Because again, we were told at some point that we fill in every single box.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with that. But if it makes you and Trax makes you or it requires it or requests it, then go ahead and put it
Okay.
in. But again, it's basically the same information as
Right.
what was identified as
The
above.
reason why, and that's like old school, that you were to fill out every box is to verify that,
The officer did what he was supposed to do.
well, yeah, that I understand that I did not miss any boxes.
All right, moving on. State Farm policy number looks fine. Everything looks good. We go down to vehicle 2. Again, some of the parameters, there's little things. Again, safe speed's an issue. We need to identify that. We identify everything else looks good. CDL, Class A, valid. There's no restrictions. It's got H for endorsements. Everything looks relatively good, right? We get down to age, male, injury code. We get through all those. That's no big deal. And then we get down to the actual vehicle itself. Now, notice there's nothing identified in the passenger area, so it's all left blank. There's no passengers. Nothing's in there. Then you get down to the vehicle year, vehicle make. This is a Kenworth T680. It's white in color. Its body style is a TS. TS is tractor semi-trailer. And then we go to vehicle or the cargo body type is van, box enclosed. Vehicle use 1 does not have a parameter, but vehicle use 2 is identified as commercial. So if vehicle use 1 doesn't fit into one of those categories, you can always put, I think it has, well, it has other bus or other special use, but that's not what we're looking for. Do me a favor, if it does not meet one of those standards, then don't put it in there. If it's not a tour bus, if it's not an inventory bus, or an inventory bus,
Other special use.
intercity bus, okay.
Yeah, other special uses
If
what
that's
they
what you're
have us
putting,
put.
okay, then
Yeah.
fine, that's
Yeah.
fine. And then for vehicle use 3, you see that now that's all just emergency operation stuff. So it wants to know, were you operating your lights? What was going on? How was that actually being displayed?
So on the, for body style, I would almost do, like truck tractor or the single unit, because if you pull in the trailer's the van. Which at this point, cargo body, I think is wrong.
I'm going to go into that with you guys a little bit later. You're absolutely right. There is a piece in the presentation that I'm going to show you guys DOT and NHTSA actually have put out a categorization of, and I would like to be able to provide you guys all with it. If you look in your PowerPoint in your presentation, you'll see it's in there, but you can't read it. It's hard to read. What I'd like to do is be able to provide you guys with copies of those because I think they're invaluable. For you working with the state, you see it a lot more often, but even in the county and every now and then you guys will have a CMV, a commercial vehicle that'll, run over something or, yeah. So with that being said, I mean, they happen, but you need to know what the categories are. If you don't know, call state police and ask for one of the CVE guys. I know sometimes it may not always be conducive, and sometimes it may not be the easiest thing to do to pick up the call, the phone or whatever, but a lot of those guys, whether they're in Albuquerque, Santa Fe or whatever, they'll help you even over the phone. Just tell them what you're looking at, tell them what it looks like, and they'll be able to categorize what the parameters are for the boxes. And in most cases, they'll come out. Not always, depending on how many is available and what you've got, but just ask, because if you don't know, then you need to put it in there. But I'm going to show you guys, we're going to talk about it.
This is starting to build its help files a little bit better to where
Well,
you get to there and, well, in theory.
no, you're right. So in Trax, what Chris has done to remedy some of this is he's given you guys links to the crash report manual. So he's taken parts of the crash report manual and put them in there, and that's one of them. So when you get to commercial motor vehicles, there should be a little info box up on the top. You click that, and it pulls up the manual piece that shows the parameters for commercial vehicles. So it'll be a lot easier for you. Yes, and thank you. This vehicle had 5 axles. We identified its weight. It had a hazmat placard, and there's no hazardous material identified whether it was leaked out or not, right? It says there's no yes or no on that. Johnson's Trucking, again, that same as above, needs to go away. Just fill in the information. Same with the owner's name, needs to be filled in. Please put all that stuff in there. And everything else on this should be fairly decent, right? Was there anything else?
The damage of the vehicles.
Yeah, the damage of the vehicle on vehicle 1 is absolutely wrong, right? It should be on the other side?
Yes.
Okay. Going to page 2, what'd you guys see? Now, one of the things that they did with this new report, and it's not going to stand out horribly like obvious, it'll take a little while to kind of get used to, and for Trax users, it's just going to auto-populate, it's just going to give you those boxes. But lighting, they added a couple boxes. Weather, they added a couple boxes. Road conditions, they added a couple boxes. Road surface stayed generally the same. Traffic control, they added a couple. Road characteristics, they've now kind of made this a little bit different, but they've got road characteristics, grade, and intersection type. So you now have more options to be a little more specific with what it is that you're looking at. Again, you're looking at some basic stuff. The intersection type, not an intersection, 5-point or more 4-way roundabout traffic circle. The roundabout and traffic circle are generally identified as the same kind of operation, but there is some differences, and that's in the manual if you need to refer to that. And then it goes to this whole idea of relation to junction. Now listen, I thought this was a little kooky when I first saw it, and so it was a little different for me to identify with. But the fact was, what they're trying to gather is information that would lend to the idea that it's related to something, some other piece. So this is what my point to this is. Someone pulls out of the Walmart parking lot, and as they pull out of the Walmart parking lot, they're going at a much slower rate of speed, right? As they pull out, they merge into that first lane, and maybe they didn't give the driver behind them or the one that's coming up in that lane enough time to stop, and that driver smacks the back of them because they're going the speed limit. What we're looking at now is a vehicle that got struck to the back. So it's a 2-vehicle crash. They're both going the same direction. One hit the rear of the other, right? Now, in most cases, there was really no identifier unless someone put something in the narrative that said, hey, I just pulled out of that driveway, or I just pulled out of that location, and I had every right to. And yeah, you're absolutely right. But what they're trying to identify by capturing this data is how it was related to that junction. So from this point on, you might have to ask a couple more questions. But where were you coming from? Where did you get here? How did you get here? Were you stopped? What were you doing? And this relation to junction should give you some parameters. Now, I know it doesn't happen a whole lot, but some of these are even like, relation to the crossover. Every crossover on the interstate says that its only use is for law enforcement, but yet people still do it all the time. So paying attention to those things is really important. Try and identify with it to the best of your ability. Then we get into work zone information. Now again, this has become a big deal, and I'm going to tell you it's been a really big deal because DOT unfortunately lost a couple people a couple years ago. If I'm not mistaken, it was up in Vegas or towards Raton, somewhere in that region. They had a couple guys working out on the road, and a car not paying attention came through and hit them both, killed them. With that being said, they're asking for the location, the type of work zone, the workers present or not, and then was law enforcement present. Now, law enforcement being present doesn't always happen. There is thought that we might adopt some kind of policy like Arizona where they are required to have a law enforcement officer in every construction zone. If you've ever driven through Arizona, which I know most of you have probably done it at one time or another, as you're driving through Arizona, you're going to see a cop if you see a construction zone. It's almost guaranteed. The only reason why you might not see him is because he needs to go get something to eat or take a break, whatever it may be. But you'll almost always see a cop there. Well, in some circumstances, even in New Mexico, you'll see a police officer because a lot of times the construction company may call and say, hey, we're having some problems. There was a time when we sat at Tramway, just north of Tramway, because the construction, they were widening the road and doing all that stuff. And the construction, the road had gotten down to 55 miles an hour. We used to sit in there for hours and just, we had a lot.
When they repaved from Coors or Unser to the river.
Yeah, that was another big one too. Again, if you guys are, if law enforcement is present, then make sure that's identified. Then we get into the road design. This sometimes can be a little tricky because I think a lot of people were taught differently, and this becomes an issue for me. The fact is that what I want from you in this box is just the lanes that are made available to the driver at the time of the crash. So if we're on 550 and we're northbound and we're 15 miles out of Bernalillo, 15 miles out of Rio Rancho, whatever it may be, and we're driving up the road, how many lanes are available to the driver that's northbound? Is it just one or is it two? Two lanes, right? Well, I know. The median portion is just a painted strip of, it's just two yellow lines, right? There's nothing really identified other than just that. So it's two lanes that are northbound. Now, if there was a continuous left lane at that location, we could say there was three. If there's a turn lane to merge off somewhere or something like that, then we could say there's three or whatever the case may be. But it's all the lanes that are made available to the driver at the time of the crash. Now, this is going to change for you guys because in a lot of crashes, you guys are having a crash at an intersection where there might be only two lanes that are northbound, but there's a turn lane to the left and a turn lane to the right. And if it happens prior to the intersection, that driver has access to those lanes. So if that's the case, then you're going to put that as a 4 lanes. You're going to put it as 4+ is what you identify. Now, if that crash happens 200 yards south of that, they don't have those turn lanes available. It's a 2-lane road. I know this can be a little bit confusing because what I'm going to tell you next is I want you in the narrative to identify and describe what the roadway looks like. So what we had been taught at State Police for a lot of years is you describe the roadway. On your assignment, when you get there, you identify. This is, US 550 is a 4-lane highway with 2 lanes north and 2 lanes south, right? The lanes made available to the driver, though, are only the 2 lanes north. So when you're filling in the box for this particular box, make sure that you just put in the lanes that are made available to the driver. Fair? The next thing on here is undivided, physical divider, painted divider, and you'll see that there is a greater than 4 feet now notifier on there, and then a physical barrier. We have to talk about this for a second. They changed the dynamic a little bit. In order for it to be considered a painted divider, it has to have more than 4 feet. US 550 is not a painted divided road. It is an undivided roadway. There's nothing that divides one lane from the other than a strip of paint down the middle, and that is no longer considered a painted division. Now, roads that I can identify that are a painted division, if you look at 528 in several locations, it does have a raised median in some locations, but in a lot of locations, it's just a flat piece of concrete that has paint on one side and paint on the other because it has that continuous left turn lane because drivers should be able to turn into Sonic or Churches or Giant or wherever they're going to turn. That is a painted divider. Now, the only time that that changes is if that divider has a median or some kind of, or not a median, a raised barrier. So if it's got curbing or anything like that, that would be identified as a physical divider.
Okay.
Now, the difference between a physical divider and a physical barrier is just that. The barrier is going to be some way that you can't get through it, you can't get over it. The cables, the cement piece that I-25 through the Jerseys, I-25 through most of, well, all through Albuquerque, they've got that cement Jersey barrier, right? Okay, that's a physical barrier. The cable is a physical barrier. The raised median that you can drive over or drive through, or the dirt that's in between in some places, that's all just a physical divider. Does that make sense? Everyone's on board? Okay, cool. The next one, does anyone know what full access control is? Do you guys know what full access control is? If you had to guess, do you guys check the box?
You have like parking lot, you have full access to everything.
Right? Yeah, that makes sense, doesn't it? If you're in a parking lot, you have full access to it, right? Or any road for that matter, right? Okay, we were wrong. I was wrong. I apologize. I was completely wrong. I had no idea what it was. The reality is full access control is only those roadways that have access control points on and off. What are those? I-25, I-10, I-40. There's only a couple others that actually work in that same parameter. Paseo del Norte from I-25 to Coors is a full access control. How do you get on that road?
From I-25 Coors, Jefferson,
The-
2nd Street.
Only certain ramps, right? You can't get on at 4th Street or Edith or any of those other locations because there's no way to get on there. There's no intersecting road. It's all done by ramps, right? I-25, how do you get on I-25? You can only get on by a ramp. Now, forgive me for this. I'm not trying to confuse anybody, but the fact is on I-25 and I-40, there are a couple locations where there is a privatized fence. And that privatized fence actually has a sign on it. Do you know what the sign says? By order of the New Mexico State Police, this is a private drive. You are not to use this unless you are the owner of the property or something along those lines. And it gives you a statute number. Keep it closed, yes. It is not a generalized used access point. It's only used for those purposes of getting to cattle or whatever it may be, whatever farmland thing they've got going on. The fact of the matter is full access control would only be used if you're on an interstate. You guys all have access to them, so I can't sit here and tell you that you're never going to see a full access control, but you'll only use it if you have an on and off ramp to that roadway. So that's the only time. So 550 is not, so, so if you're looking at this, there's a couple of ways that you can identify. Which road are we talking about?
550.
550. All right. So it's not an alley. It's not a one-way. It's not a ramp. Two-way. Well, so it depends on where it's at. There are places where there is a division. Now you have to identify if it's a physical barrier or a what was the physical divider. If it's a physical barrier or physical divider or painted division, then you can put on there that it's a divided roadway. Otherwise, it's a two-way non-divided.
The only question I have is, you do get off a ramp to get onto 550.
Okay.
So how is that one?
550 has access points everywhere. I can pull off from Pizza Hut to Applebee's to Giant to anything else. I can go, yeah, there's several places all over the place that I can get on. And as you go up 550, even going towards Jemez, there's multiple locations where I can pull off and take a dirt road up into the hills or go biking or whatever the case may be. So as long as there's access points to the roadway, it's not a full access control.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, because originally I thought the same thing.
I
If
know,
you
I
just,
love this whole
like
thing.
almost every road, yeah,
Yeah.
everything should be considered full access, but
Yeah.
that's not the case. It's just those particular roads. So, yes, good? All right, now, I told you guys this earlier, their parent contributing factors has changed. They put some more boxes in there for you, but one of the things they did that's really kind of cool for this particular report, for the PDF, they moved it. So all the driver actions are all together. All the environment actions are together. The motor vehicle actions are all together, and the roadway actions are all together. Again, they've added some more boxes, and I think this is really important. This lends to the idea of what caused the crash. This is probably one of the more critical pieces of this. I need you to do just a little bit of investigation. I know it's a drag, and I know most people aren't going to tell you that, oh yeah, I was on my cell phone paying attention to Facebook, watching while I was driving down the road. People don't do that. I get it. But what I'm going to ask you guys to do is try and get as much information as you can and put the most realistic piece in there. All right, the driver's actions. Again, you've got a few more boxes to identify with. They're all in there. Just identify them. Now, the sequence of events. Do you fill it out? Are you guys mandatory required?
I just do it.
I only do the,
That's my
yeah, I only do the
spot.
first part sometimes.
Okay.
And that's what I need
Do you do it?
more
If it's
teaching
CVE,
on that.
yeah, so CMB, yes. If it's POVs, no.
Okay, so listen. Several years ago, we were trained that this was a commercial vehicle box only. This was only used for commercial vehicles. As a matter of fact, in the old Excel spreadsheet, if you actually hit the little green tab on the upper box of this thing, it actually said for commercial use only. It's no longer that way. So if you could, I would greatly appreciate everyone putting in as much information as you can. Now, the boxes aren't hard. They're super simple. They're only a few categories. But what they're asking is, when the vehicle left the roadway, identify that. Then the vehicle overturned, then identify that. Then the vehicle hit a deer or a fence or caught on fire, and put it in the sequence. The idea behind this is NHTSA and DOT now have a quick reference to identify the basic parameters of this crash. We know that this happened, then that happened, then that happened. Now they can identify, do we want to continue to look at this crash, or do we need to look at other reports to identify with what's going on? This is really important for all crashes now. So if you guys could do that, I would greatly appreciate it. Now there's a catch-all to this. There is one of those codes that says that it's other and it will be described in the narrative.
That's what I use as a second one.
If you do that, that's fine, but I'm going to ask you to be very thorough in your narrative. This is where the problem is. We may refer to the narrative, but we only give like a sentence or two identifying. Okay, so just be very clear and concise with what you're putting in the narrative. All right, so please, 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 please always do the sequence of events. The next ones are pretty simple. It's the pedestrian, sobriety, the pedicyclist, driver, the sobriety boxes, pedestrian physical condition, the driver physical condition, and then we go into the next box, which is the pedestrian pedicyclist actions. Look, what they're asking for is probably a little more information than what we've done in the past. They're asking you to kind of even predict in some of this. Now, I don't want you to make things up, but they're asking you, what were the pedestrians' actions prior to being struck? What were they doing? Were they crossing the road in a crosswalk? Were they crossing the road not at a crosswalk? What were they doing that led to this incident happening? You're going to have to ask some questions. And unfortunately, a lot of cases, you're not getting the questions from the person that got struck because they most of the time don't make that. So we're trying to find out from witnesses and everything else you can. The more information you can find out about that if you're working a pedestrian, the better. Have any of you worked in pedestrian or bicyclist? Yeah? You guys have? Okay. They're miserable. I'm not a fan at all. I'm going to show you guys here in a minute that most of them are done wrong. All right, I'm going to breeze through this. The next one is the additional occupants, then the other property. That's all the same. For this particular report, there was no witness listed, but there was a witness statement. This is a problem. We need to make sure that gets corrected. Then we identify the enforcement action. If you guys notice, in the narrative, he identified he was cited, but in here, it identifies he got a warning. Now, in some cases, that's not always a differentiating thing because in most cases, a citation still is and can be a warning, but just make sure that you're clear on that. Yes, sir?
And he had an expired DL.
Yes, perfect. On the first one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so he should have been cited or something should have been identified. Yes?
So since they got rid of the narrative portion on here, do we automatically just go to the supplemental narrative? Is that what we're doing now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's going to happen, nothing different changes in tracks. You've always been given just a narrative box.
Right, but it wasn't long enough.
I know, it keeps populating into other
So you know how
boxes.
to go to a supplemental,
I
so
know.
that avoids that. That's cool.
Yeah, I think they're actually working on it. I thought that was something that was being
There's a
fixed.
better workflow to where
It-
the narrative is still,
Fits or works, but yeah. But yeah, so as far as being a tracks user, you should be able to just go to the initial, type as much as you possibly can, because it does have a character limit, and then it goes to the supplement.
Yeah, because how we do.
But
it,
I
we're
thought it
supposed to
kicked.
do- We're supposed to do C supplemental.
That's what I put, yeah.
And then just go to the.
And that's fine. That's perfect. That'll work out great. Now on here is something a little bit different too. You have time notified. Where do you get that? Okay, the time you were dispatched, right? Yeah, the times don't necessarily match, but there's some reason for this. So the time that you were notified was 15:08. The time that you arrived was 15:14, right? The time the roadway was cleared. Yes. So what we're looking for is you have a crash that's in the middle of I-25. It's blocking both lanes of traffic. This now creates a problem, right? We're going to have to divert traffic somewhere else. We're going to have to figure something out. How long does it take? And this is why we want to know. We want to know how long this takes. So what we're asking you guys to do is keep another time. So at some point, if you can, remember, call into dispatch and say roadway's cleared. When you have a lane made available for traffic to proceed southbound on I-25, once you've got at least a lane and traffic's now flowing again, you need to identify that. Now, there's one more. Time incident cleared. When you finally get everything picked up, cleaned up, done, tow truck's on the way out, you turn off your lights and you take off. I need to know what time that was. Yes. Now this can change. For the state guys, it's a little bit different because they're generally the ones that are handling a lot of these. But in most cases, this could be like a day or two, primarily because you could have a tanker or a semi-truck that rolls over and spills its cargo all over the place, and it could be like 2 days before they get everything picked up. If that's the case, put the time on there, but put in the narrative the date that it actually took place, because there's nowhere to really categorize that on this report.
And when we don't need these times, we're okay to leave a blank and trucks will let you leave a blank, like the time roadway cleared and time.
Yeah, so it's probably not. It may. It's still brand new, so we're going to wait and see what happens.
Okay.
So we kind of joked about this earlier, but Sean's going to be working on this here. He's got access to the new report. So what they're asking Sean and some of the other state guys, and actually Doña Ana County, is to go in, start making some reports, start generating some stuff to see if there's any little quirks, kinks, things like that. Right now, I think you probably will be able to leave it blank, but I think the hope is that you don't. I think what they want you to do is fill it out. But if it is like a delayed, like it took a couple of days, you guys turn your reports in every day?
We should by the end of the day.
Okay, but not always. Like if you're still pending, then that's something that you can probably hold on to by identifying to the sergeant, hey, we still haven't got this cleared. It'll be done by this afternoon, and I'll put the time in there, and I'll put the date in the narrative, or whatever the case may be.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Everything else is the same. The only thing that's on here that sometimes can be identified different is the district. If you guys have a specific district that you work, they originally did that a long time ago for state police, but you guys might have like a north and south or something, or do you have anything identifying? Nothing? Okay. Do you guys have anything for districts? Do you guys?
Yeah, we have districts.
Okay, that's fine. Pull whatever. It's for your use only. All right, the narrative's a mess, right? Should there be more information?
Yeah, just a little bit more.
Okay. No, perfect. So I try to put in there enough that I thought that the average user would say, oh yeah, that's plenty, but it's not. This is not enough information to really identify. If I was to do nothing but read this narrative, I don't know that I could really capture what it was that actually happened with this crash. Is that fair? Okay. So the problem then is I've got to figure this out, and I've got to figure out what I'm going to do. So what I'll often do is I'll go to the diagram to see what it was that the thing looked like. With that being said, I have to be able to identify with what this is. So the diagram actually becomes a lot more critical. Now, the fact of the matter is this diagram is horribly poor. There's a lot of things that are really missing. North should have been done different. There should have been some different parameters on the way that the diagram is put together. There's no measurements. There's no identifiers as those measurements. There's no legend. The officer didn't sign it. There's a ton of things that are wrong with this diagram. But I'm going to tell you, this is the reason why this is still of value is because somewhere, somehow, somebody can look at this and say, oh, okay, I have a better understanding of what happened based on the way that the diagram shows. This vehicle was more than likely coming down this road. I don't know exactly which lane, but I know it was coming down this road. The truck pulled out, and the vehicle tried to avoid it, and they struck. They hit the front corner to front corner, and the vehicle peeled off a little and went a little forward. Does that make sense? Yes. This is better than nothing. I know it sounds stupid, but if I'm sitting in a dark room at UNM and I'm trying to go through crash report after crash report after crash report, and I get one that the narrative looks like this, and it doesn't give me enough information, having this is gold. So I'm not telling you that you have to do anything. That's not my job. My job is to incite the idea that I would like you to do a diagram, if you could, on all crashes. Now, I know there's times when the crash is moved or the weather is so bad that you can't do it. I'm not ever going to take that away from you. But if you have the ability of doing a diagram in a crash, I would beg you to actually do the diagram. It doesn't take much. I mean, realistically, how long do you think it takes to do a diagram? 20?
Not more than 15 minutes.
15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe, even if it's a little more complex, right? We're trying to get some measurements of some marks in the roadway. We're trying to get some measurements of where the tires are. We're taking those measurements off of a reference line and reference point. It's not a big deal. Is that fair? Okay. So this, although may not seem like much, is actually worth more than what it's actually given. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the crash report? Anything that we did with this particular one? Sean, you good? Okay, I'm going to go through these real quick so we can get you guys out of here. Again, some of the common errors, putting unknown when there's no vehicle to, just don't put anything. It's happening, oddly enough. It won't let you in tracks, but it's happening in the PDF version of this, so it's something we have to be aware of. Same as above, shows in the system as the address. Try and avoid using that. There's no value to it. Again, I mentioned this. Pedestrians and pedicyclists are probably the most commonly goofed reports, for lack of better terms. We're making errors in these things because we're not actually categorizing them the way that we should, and there's also a few other things that are happening. Listen, a bicycle is not necessarily identified as a vehicle. It's not categorized as a vehicle, nor are there any parameters to put in there. It's a 1998 Huffy blue whatever. There's no room to put that in there. If you want to put the type of bike that it is, where does it go? In the narrative. Put in the narrative that if you want to describe it. And why would it be relevant? Well, if the guy's driving a black bike and it's dark at night, and that might be something, and there's no reflectors on it, maybe that's something that we want to put on there. But if it doesn't have any relevance, then it doesn't get categorized as a vehicle, so it's not on there. So don't put anything in there. Now, again, when you're looking at the front seating position, you're going to put PD as pedestrian, you're going to put PC as pedicyclist, and then it'll give you the parameters that will allow you the boxes and tracks to be able to fill that out. Now, for everybody else, they've got to be able to put in those information, but I want everything that you can. So if you've got a person that was struck on a bicycle or a pedestrian, put their driver's license number if they have one, put their date of birth, put their occupation, put all the parameters that you can, with the exception of the vehicle, because there's no vehicle. If all the vehicle stuff should be left blank. Now in tracks, it doesn't even give you a vehicle option. It doesn't give you anything. It moves on. It gives you the ability of putting in their information, and that's the end of it. Again, some of the reasons for this is the lack of information on the face sheet, no information on the face sheet in some cases, and then the limited information in the narrative. The other thing I wanted to address real quick is the at-fault vehicle. Where do you guys put them? One or two?
One.
One? Okay. I'm going to tell you there's nothing that says you have to do it either way. Whatever you guys do, just stay with it. It's fine. But this question gets asked of me a lot. Which one should be the at-fault? It doesn't really matter as long as you put in the narrative what you're doing while you're doing it, that kind of thing. Does that mean?
Per your policy.
Unless per your policy, it says. Yes, sir.
The thing that I had issue with was I ended up putting one as vehicle one because the true vehicle number one, the at-fault vehicle, ended up leaving the scene.
Yeah.
Now, when they leave the scene, but you get a description, do we still put that information in the report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it's...
But unknown.
Yeah, no, so the unknown is okay. If you're talking about like a hit and run?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the unknown is okay, but you're going to put every parameter in there that you can identify. So if they told you it was a blue Chevy, then yes, you put in there blue and Chevy, and that's what you put. If it was a pickup truck or a passenger car, yes. Try and put everything in there that you possibly can, because we want to try and get as much data as we possibly can. But then in the narrative, you're going to give a little more understanding. And I know you guys do this. You put in there, vehicle was identified as, this is what they saw one occupant, or they saw multiple occupants, just couldn't identify, if there's two or three. And you don't want to put that on the face sheet because you don't know. So putting the unknown as the driver is fine, and then putting in whatever you can identify is what you need to do. Lane usage, I already addressed this. The fact is, please use the lanes that are made available to the driver at the time of the crash for purposes of checking the box in the back. This is identified as 1 lane north, 1 lane south, but it also has the continuous left lane. If the crash is northbound, then they have 2 lanes made available to them, right? If the crash is southbound, they have 2 lanes made available to them. On this one, same thing, 2 lanes, but this is an undivided roadway. That paint doesn't divide it any longer. It has to be more than 4 feet. Oddly enough, there's plenty of places in New Mexico. I went out into Cruces. Yeah, I thought it was really weird. Well, I was in Las Cruces, and there's a Kohl's on the north end of town. When you go around the curve, the road actually opens up a little, but it only opens up 4 feet. I don't know why. I thought it was the weirdest thing in the world. There's no turn lane for anybody because there's nothing to turn into either way. I mean, there's residential, but there's no designated turn lane. But there's a 4-foot gap. In Las Cruces. But there's plenty of places in Bernalillo and Los Lunas where you have a continuous left lane, where you have that middle that has that just level surface and you can turn left. Those are all still considered painted divisions.
So, to get a little bit more technical, I guess, in order to measure this painted divider, are you outside paint to outside paint or inside to inside?
Inside's fine. And I'll tell you what, you can even step it off. In most cases, as long as it's more than that 4 feet, you're fine. And in most cases, it is. I mean, every now and then you'll find maybe something that's got maybe a little bit of a division. Well, 550 is an example of that. If I'm not mistaken, there's several spots where it's got that rumble strip through the center, and it's got just like this much room between. Yeah. Okay. So it's got some places where things like that exist. So as long as it's more.
The wonky.
I know, but I'm.
3 feet 6 inches, but putting the yellow lines in, it comes out to 4 feet.
Okay, if that happens, then you do that. But I don't know of anywhere that would. So I know what you're getting at, and it's a fair question, because it is. You know, you don't know what you're going to come into. And there are places that it is kind of wonky the way that it's identified. All right, we don't see this a whole lot. I'm not going to identify the agency, but this actually came in a couple years ago. This was a handwritten on a 45. Can you read any of that? Yeah, neither can I. And my vision's horrible, but it's not that bad. Some of the print's too small, so the scanner's not picking it up. The other problem is, whenever you do something like this, it recognizes that check as being whatever that box is. It does that for all of these. So it sees this as a 1, and maybe this is a 1, and this is a 1. It doesn't understand anything different. So it's categorizing some of these crashes completely wrong. So again, if you're doing any kind of written document, which none of you do, don't worry, we'll just keep moving. Don't do written documents, just do it online. Thank you very much. Duplicate crash reports. This is happening. It's actually happening more frequently than we'd like to think. But the fact is there are agencies that get reports, their numbers from some other design, some other system. Generally what that ends up being is it's like dispatch gives them the number, or they have like a catalog that they get the numbers from and then they sign out like old school, right?
I remember back in the Edgewood days.
Yeah, that's how we did it, right? You'd go get a crash report number and you'd put it on, you'd sign off that you took it and the date and the time of the crash or wherever it was. The problem is sometimes these always don't happen. So what's happening is reports are getting duplicated, and I say reports, report numbers are getting duplicated, and the problem then exists that you're talking about 2 different events, 2 different days, 2 different locations, and this is creating a problem for UNM and DOT and everybody else. Yes, sir?
So I think there's an issue with tracks on that, because in there's a thing called replicate. So I was kind of confused on one a while back where I started filling out the tracks report, and in some areas of the county we don't get good internet connection, so then it takes you offline.
Yeah.
So I hit replicate, and no, on the tracks, and it made 2.
Is there what?
And it hit 2 instead of.
You're talking about validate?
No, there's a replicate on there too.
So why would you replicate it?
Because I wanted to try.
On the citations, I know there is.
After you, because I had lost service, so I tried to replicate it so it would still go through. In other words.
Yeah, so in all reality, if you lose connection, as long as you've signed into this laptop that it's captured your profile locally, you shouldn't have to worry about,
Just keep typing kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. that's-
and then once you hit
Yeah.
connectivity again, it'll send to the
It'll send.
server.
See, because I was new to the system, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Replicate. Why is this not working? All right. The other thing is I know you guys don't do SUPs a whole lot, but when you guys do a SUP, make sure that it has the original crash report number on it. I know that sounds silly, but oddly enough, it's actually happening a lot more frequently. They're just generating a whole new number for the report, and you can't do that. We have to be able to correlate the two together. Under reporting, this doesn't happen a whole lot, and tracks negates this whole thing, but for agencies that do not have tracks, the reports need to go in on a timely basis. So generally speaking, for admin, it would be trying to get them in like every couple weeks, at least at minimum once a month. There was a couple of agencies, and again, I won't mention any names, but there was an agency a few years ago prior to tracks that would send their reports at the end of the year. Hundreds of reports were being generated, and then they would be sent at the end of the year. So it just clogs the whole system up. I mean, it just makes a mess.
State police, they run an audit, and if it doesn't say processed, then it doesn't make it to,
Doesn't make it to DOT, yeah.
so anything that says open or validated for that whole year, we have to go back and send mastergram to the district commanders and say, what's the status of these reports?
Yeah,
Because if it's open or validated, it's not making the auto push out to everybody else.
agreed. Contributing factor. I need you guys to do me a favor. I need you to be a little more thorough in the investigative tools that you use. Ask questions, find out. The first fatal I ever got to be a part of, I got called out on, was just north of Jal, New Mexico, south of Eunice. A young lady was doing her makeup. She looked under the visor. She was in the wrong lane. Truck was coming. She overcorrected. Car rolls. During the roll, the door opened. She had one of those automatic seatbelts. The seatbelt started to go. She got ejected. As she got ejected, the car continued to roll and cut her head completely off. I'll never forget it, but I'll tell you what, I know she was doing her makeup. You want to know how I knew she was doing her makeup? It was everywhere. And not only that, but half of her face was done. So it was obvious. Now, that was easy to identify with, but the fact is you guys know when people are eating, you know when they're on the phone, you know when they're using the newspaper. I'm not telling you that I need you to make these things up, but I need you to ask some questions. And most people aren't going to tell you the truth because they don't want the liability of and the responsibility of. They don't want to take responsibility for what they've done. I get that. But the more inquisitive you guys can be, the more information you guys can find out, the better the report's going to be. So try and find out as much information as you can. If alcohol was involved, marijuana was involved, whatever those cases may be. Diagrams, again, diagramming should be relatively simple. There shouldn't be a whole lot to it. This diagram is really, really simple. There's not a lot. We know which north is. We know this was on I-25. We know this happened by mile marker 2. We have a legend that identifies where all the measurements were taken. We have a identifier as where the tire marks were. We have the debris. We know where the impact was. All these things are very relevant. The fact is you can look at this diagram and you can have a generalized understanding of what took place. You don't have to be there. We weren't there on whatever date this thing was. But the fact was, we know at mile marker 2 at I-25 that this is what occurred. This is what this was, and this is how it happened. West side shoulder, right lane, we know that traffic, this is the southbound lanes. There's a lot of things we can identify with. We know how many lanes are made available. We know the width of those lanes. We know the width of the shoulders. It's simple. There's nothing to this, and this does not take long. So although this might have been a little more significant, we've got 3 vehicles. I'm sure somebody was hurt. We're probably going to do a diagram on this anyway. The value to the end users is immeasurable. Again, I was telling you guys earlier with the crash report that we had done earlier, it's really, really important. So if you guys can just do some kind of diagram and get others to thinking about doing a quick diagram, it really does help. Signatures and tracks, it automatically does it because you guys have already signed something, but signatures are required on the report. It's a document of record. Please make sure that they're signed. I know it sounds silly, but latitude and longitude, we talked about this already. Please, please, please get the approximate point of impact as your latitude and longitude, as close as you possibly can. I know there's some parameters that might not allow that, and that's okay. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere and you can't use your phone, but there are apps on your phone that you can get through the Play Store or whatever else, whatever Apple Store or whatever you can do.
Drive to that location once it's cleared.
That's all you have to do. Just wait. Yes.
With your lights.
Yeah, and so I generally pick on the state guys a little bit because generally we see this from them, and county does this too. You secure the scene, so you park your car like a half mile down the road, right? And then, oddly enough, we'll see that the crash actually occurred at the 0.2 of a mile marker at the 132 or whatever, but the GPS location shows it like the 131, and it's like a mile or a half a mile off or whatever it may be. And so the problem then is, well, where do we pin map this? We'd like to use the GPS because we know it's a finite, it's a very specific location, but with them not matching, it's hard to identify. So again, if you can get the app on your phone or something like that, it would be greatly appreciated if you do them. Again, some agencies require it, some don't. DOT does not require it as of yet, but it's probably forthcoming. The other location, I told you guys about this earlier, a Googleable reference. As far as the other location goes, for the face sheet of your crash report, the other location is what I'm talking about. So try and find something that's an address, an intersection, a milepost, something that can be searched on the web. If you are doing a diagram, those parameters do not exist. Don't worry about it. If you have to use a fire hydrant, I'm fine with it. But don't use a fire hydrant for another location on the crash report. It makes it difficult. Military time. Any of you military? No? Does anyone know what military time is for midnight? 2400? 0000. Do you know what 0000 in binary code is? It's nothing. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It doesn't even recognize it as anything. So when you put 000 as the crash time, which when they told me this was a problem, I'm like, you're kidding. Like, how many crashes happen at midnight? Like, really? Like that many? But evidently a ton of them do because guys are putting 0000. Listen, put 2400. You can't put 2401 because that's not a thing. But maybe, just maybe, the crash happened at 0001, or maybe it happened at 2359. I'm not saying, I'm just saying that maybe. All right. Private property, again, please make sure you check the box. It's really important that it's identified. It's always a big deal. Race, W is no longer a category. You guys don't have to worry about it because it doesn't even pull up. Neither is UT. UT in the commercial side, there is a UT for commercial trailers, but UT used to be the common code for SUVs long time ago, right? Yeah, we just used to identify it as a utility vehicle. So now, if you guys can, make sure that you don't use those codes because they're not even in there. You won't see them. So even in the PDF, it's not an issue. I talked to you about this. Please, 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 from here on out, all crash reports will have the sequence of events put in there. Again, there's maybe 20 codes total, and basically what they're looking for is this happened, then that happened, or this happened and that was it. You know, the vehicle ran off the roadway, whatever. If it struck something, then you put in there. You just identify it. There is a catch-all again. There is, I think it's OTC. That'll identify it, describes it in the narrative. So, yeah, it happens. Do you guys handle fatals?
Yes.
Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we don't personally, our traffic.
Okay, so you have a traffic group. You
If
guys
they're
do.
not available, you handle them.
Okay. Do you guys handle fatals? Okay. Just be thorough. Someone died. The fact of the matter is we can give them a little extra. And in most cases we do, but we're finding, and the reason why this is even up here is there are agencies that will have officers that sometimes still minimize these things. The narrative should be very comprehensive. We should know everything. There should be nothing left unturned. I should know the weather conditions to the barometer pressure. I should know everything. So just please be thorough in the way that you do those. Locations, these are some of the things that are generally missing, or they're wrong. The county roadway, milepost street, it sounds silly, but in a lot of reports, these things are coming back and they're just not correct. And what was happening before was someone would use an old Excel version and then they would go back to that old Excel version and try and fill in all the boxes where it was already filled out, thinking that they got everything and they didn't. If just review your report, seriously, take 2 seconds. It's not going to take you long, I promise. Just review it, make sure that everything's checked and everything's right. When citations or enforcement action is pending, please do me a favor. Put something in the narrative. This is happening a lot, and I didn't realize it was that significant. But there was a question that came up by DOT not too long ago, and their question was, how many crashes do we have where citations are pending currently? Well, when they went to do it, there was no way to identify because it wasn't always put. And then when it was put, they couldn't identify what actually happened. Listen, I don't know that you need to go, drumming up a sup every single time, something ends up, after the pending. If it's a fatal and you're charging somebody, then absolutely, there needs to be follow-up to it. But for this particular thing, you got a guy that has an expired driver's license. If you decide for whatever reason that you're putting pending on there, then justify why you did it. Put in your report that based on the circumstances, the gentleman was out of country for 6 months or whatever. I advised him that he needed to go get his driver's license renewed or whatever. So at this time, I just will identify that it was pending, or maybe you gave him a warning, whatever. But if you do pending, just make sure you put why. They went to the hospital, they're incapacitated, whatever the case may be, just put something on there that identifies why.
So like on the, I don't do it, but I can see how, you like that?
I don't do it.
I can see how some officers would get confused on, okay, well, having an expired driver's license, did that contribute to the crash, which, is that something that I would say I signed in for the driver's license, or just the violations that caused the crash that you would list?
Oh, that's a really good question. Because the reality is, in most cases, we really don't care if they were cited for their driver's license or not, right? It really has no contributing factor to what the crash actually took place. But to be comprehensive in the way that we document the entirety of the event, we would still probably want to put it on there. So although it may not pertain, it's still probably something that's relevant because it's a part of the action that took place because of this event. In this particular case, I would put on there that I cited the guy for expired driver's license.
Isn't it though on tracks, it just gives you one option of one citation, or can you add?
Oh no, you can add more. Yeah, no, you can continue to add.
Add group?
Is it under that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Add group and then just.
I meant to mention this earlier too. In the PDF version of this, the new form, if you guys get the opportunity when it does come out, which it probably should be hopefully soon, go check it out. What's really cool at the bottom of the box of the second page, it actually has where you can add more vehicles, and all you do is click the box and it gives you 2 more vehicles with the vehicles identified as vehicle 3 and 4, and then you can do it again, 5 and 6, do it again, 7, 8. So it does it all the way through. So it's kind of cool the way that it's set up. All right. So what goes into a narrative?
Who, what, where, when, why?
So listen, we were taught some time ago that, yeah, you put a story together. You need to be articulate in what it was that happened. I think this is kind of a fair way to go about it. Your assignment, you got called. You were told to go. This is what you did. This is where you were going. You were told it was a crash with injuries, someone's trapped, whatever the case may be, identify what you were doing, right? Then you're going to identify what the scene looked like. Upon my arrival, I observed 3 vehicles, one of which was on its side, whatever it may be. Describe the scene. Give an understanding of what it is that you're looking at so that somebody reading this can get a better understanding of what it is that you were getting yourself into. Try and get driver statements. Now listen, there's a couple ways to do this. I did for a long time, I would just write down the statement, whatever they told me. And then I started giving them a piece of paper and asking them to write it out. The only problem with that was I found out that there's a lot of people that don't know how to write, don't know how to spell. So I stopped doing that and went back to writing it out myself again because it seemed to be easier to, because I didn't want to make them look bad because I was actually putting in exactly what they wrote because it was their statement, right?
I'll tell you what, like serious crashes, I would usually ask them what happened and have them write it out. And then actually tracks, you can do it in tracks. You can actually scan
And upload it.
and upload that statement with the crash report.
Yeah.
I just smile it out.
Yeah, and that's fine too. But yeah, that's a great way to do things. Make sure you get witness statements. I know they don't come as frequently anymore because people don't want to be a part of anything. They don't want to see anything. They don't want to hear anything. They don't want to do anything. They just want to do whatever. Weather. I was talking about this earlier. I know it seems insignificant, but if it's snowing, what does that mean? If it's raining, what does that mean? If it's windy, what does that mean? Look, we've seen all those things in New Mexico, and we do on a regular. The fact is that wind can be blowing at such a speed that the state police officer's hat flies off and runs down the road, right? Or it could be just like a slight breeze. Does it affect the crash? Maybe not. But can wind affect a crash? Absolutely. So we need to be able to identify these. We know this. You work down by Lordsburg or Grants and the wind blows, oh man, the dust kicks up and before you know it, you can't see 15 feet in front of you.
Well, I think the other thing to remember, and I know you guys don't deal with it as much, but like the bus, and you saw it even in Edgewood, you got a call of a crash, and you get out there and you're like, yeah, there's like this sleet storm, and you're looking around, and you're like,
What? Yeah.
The road's wet, but where's the smooth?
Yeah, and it happens. New Mexico's funny that way. I mean, it could be clear as a bell 1 minute and snowing the next, and that could be in June.
But by the time you get out there, the conditions have changed again.
Dramatically, yeah. The investigations, please put enough information in there. Please make sure the reader understands exactly what was going on, what happened, how it happened, why it happened. These things are very relevant. They really are. And someone somewhere is reading this. They are, I promise you. You guys would be amazed at how many people actually read your reports. It's incredible. So please put as much information in there as you possibly can. It's really, really important. All right, commercial motor vehicles. Identifying the correct cargo type, identifying some of the basic information and knowing where to find it. I've put this up here for you. These are generally what you're going to be looking at when you're looking for commercial vehicles. Some of the ones that don't often get seen as, buses, vans, fire trucks, UPS trucks, some of those little transport, delivery type vehicles, U-Haul and some of the other trucks. These are all identified as commercial vehicles. If you guys, I would love to. Oh yeah, that would be great, but I don't have it.
Oh, very well.
Actually, you know what? I probably could. Well, I know, and it's in the manual, but I'm going to tell you, if you go to the FMCA, SA, it's the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, under USDOT. So the website's here. Let me give it to you real quick. www.fmcsa.dot.gov, G-O-V. If you need it, you can get it, and I can get it. You can just email me, and I can send it to you too, but it's on there. And I think they even give you more parameters on their site. This is just an easy, quick reference kind of thing. Trax is an amazing system. The fact is, and I try and sell this to a lot. Seriously, if you're watching this and you're not on Trax, please contact NMDOT, contact Sonia at DPS. Seriously, there are resources to get assistance for agencies that don't actually have the means. There are computers that are made available by some agencies. Santa Fe County, Doña Ana County often refurbish theirs and send them out to other agencies. There's printer scanners, and there's money for some of those things through DOT and through some grant funding. For those agencies that are not on Trax, you'd be amazed. Trax is an amazing tool. You can write citations 4 or 5 within a matter of minutes. You can do DWI arrests within, it doesn't take hours anymore. You can get all the stuff. You scan it in, it populates everything. Tow sheet's done. Probable cause is filled out the top. You just got to do your narrative stuff. I mean, everything gets done. So it's really a cool program, and there's a ton of advantages to it. So if you have the access to it, great. If you do not, I would encourage your department to get to there. This is what the new crash report looks like. You guys have gotten to see it. I just wanted you to be able to see it on the system. These are all the parameters that we've went through. These are some of the things that were identified as being new. Again, the crash number was, that DOT number's gone. On off-roadway, more classifications. Crash classifications, now the first harmful event. And then the damage severity, we added a few more things. Weather, intersection design, relation to junction, all of these things are actually identified as having more parameters to them. You guys have more boxes to identify with. So it gives you the ability of being a little more accurate in depicting what it was that you were looking at. The biggest thing about this is, this crash report is a lot more significant than we give it credit for. The fact was, no one ever told me any of this stuff when I went through the academy. They just told me how to fill out the boxes, right? And if you didn't fill out the box, you put a line through it, or you put NA. Listen, we can't do those things anymore. The way that the digital system works is it's completely different, and it doesn't function that way. So with that being said, please put a little extra effort into these things. And I actually ask every class that I teach, if you could just take 10 more minutes out of your day. I know you guys are busy, but 10 more minutes to devote to making sure that this crash report is sound and good and has everything that it's supposed to. I would greatly appreciate it. Before we finish, does anybody have any questions? Now, I know you may. We can talk offline, right? Do you guys have any questions, any concerns, nothing? All right. Thank you guys very much. We're done.